Chapter 380. The reason they didn't assemble a large force was because General Li's son, Li Haihai's fate was right there. A large force would attract the demons' attention, and if they weren't careful they would be completely wiped out. On the other hand, the many small teams would distract the demons' attention and cause them to run all over the place, which would allow more people to survive. Hearing this, Li Yunxin sighed in his heart. They were going to cause trouble. Looking at the situation, there would probably be hundreds of thousands of mortal troops gathered in Tongtian Swamp. Hundreds of thousands. For a war, it was a terrifying number. In the history of his previous world, there had also been a large-scale war of this scale. However, that was often when the number of people in support was counted. Although it was said to be hundreds of thousands, there were only tens of thousands of soldiers. But now, the Qin kingdom had sent more than 30,000 soldiers. These professional soldiers could almost start a war to destroy a small country like the Yu kingdom. Adding on the armies of the other countries, there would be another big problem. What were they going to eat and drink? Since they had to cross mountains to transport things, they wouldn't bring much rations. It would probably only be enough for them to walk to Tongtian Swamp. In this era, the transportation ability was low. A large city didn't even have a population of 1 million. To support an army of hundreds of thousands, it might need millions of people in support. The amount of food and drink every day was shocking. A medium-sized country like the Yi Kingdom probably couldn't bear such a burden. At most it could last for 10 days. But looking at it, it would be more than 10 days before Yun Shan landed in Tongtian Swamp. Once it came to that, the army would be short of food and clothing and morale would be shaken. Moreover, the allied armies of the various countries were not united. Perhaps they would become a burden instead of a fighting force. Daotong and Kenzo, what would they do? Li Yunxin suddenly thought of the city of Weiqing. In the city of Weiqing, Yun Zi killed tens of thousands of people to form a formation. After that, the people of the Langya Grotto Heaven destroyed an entire city to form a formation. The people of the Xianmen were also not good people, unless they... For some reason this thought made Li Yunxin feel very uncomfortable. Burning down the city of Weiqing was a small matter. It could always be covered up. He could even blame it on the demons. However, if these hundreds of thousands of soldiers were used to form a formation in Yi country, this world would no longer belong to Daotong or Kenzo. The imperial court in the secular world would become enemies with them. At that time, when the mortal kingdoms and the mystical sects attacked, would the cultivators kill them or not? After killing people, the celestial beings told them to shepherd the people. With such a thing happening, the celestial society would probably be enraged once again. Wasn't it said that the last time he angered the heavens, there was no immortal decree for 1,000 years, almost causing the inheritance of the celestial sect of wonders to be severed? However, Li Yunxin was not very clear about what kind of existence the so-called celestial being was and how powerful they were. He still needed to know more. In fact, he had already formed a faint conjecture in his heart. Therefore, after talking with Ding Min for a while, he sent him away impatiently. Ding Min naturally wanted to ask about his background in detail, but Li Yunxin glared at him and raised his eyebrows. How could he dare to ask? He was a hot-blooded soldier, but there was no need for him to use it on Li Yunxin. The night passed reluctantly. Originally, the soldiers first saw the old monster and then saw the means of the Taoist priest Hun Yuanzi, so it was difficult for them to calm down. However, after going through a fierce battle, they were also very tired. In the end, after burying the bodies of the 4 dead comrades, they fell into a deep sleep. Su Mao, on the other hand, pretended to sleep in the middle of the night, only staring at Li Yunxin's every move. However, Li Yunxin was meditating. The concentration of a cultivator was not comparable to that of a mortal. He sat there for the whole night without moving an inch. When the sun was about to rise, Su Mao also fell asleep. Then the morning fog gradually dissipated, birds chirped, and rays of sunlight shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves. A new day had arrived. After a little rest, the small team set off again. The noble Taoist priest naturally could not walk, so he rode a pack horse. This pack horse had short legs, so it walked much more steadily than a military horse. Su Mao was the vanguard, the other squad leaders brought up the rear, and Ding Min and Li Yunxin walked in the middle of the team. However, today's march was not as easy as the previous few days. First, it was because someone died last night. Second, it was because everyone knew that the demons really existed and it was very likely that they would come again. Therefore, after walking for about 2 hours, Ding Min also felt that something was wrong. Although he was good at leading troops, he was not good at ideological work. He only thought that if they could meet another demon and ask this Hunyuanzi Daoist priest to kill it, perhaps their morale would be boosted. They walked gloomily for the whole morning. When it was noon, they found a mountain call to take shelter from the wind and rested there. They started a fire to cook. The soldiers gathered in twos and threes to eat, and then talked about what happened last night, inevitably revealing a sense of dejection in their words. Occasionally, wild beasts passed through the forest, making noises. There were also people who grabbed their weapons in a panic to be on guard. Ding Min sighed. She broke the biscuit in her hand and frowned. If this continues, we won't last more than a few days. We haven't even walked out of this mountain and the people's morale is already gone. If we encounter something else, I'm afraid that even if we fought before, we won't be able to fight now. Su Mao was silent at the side. He only stared at the dejected soldiers. After watching for a while and hearing them describe the demons as more and more terrifying, he suddenly frowned and shouted loudly, "What are you afraid of?" Was there anyone who thought that they would definitely die peacefully in bed when they joined the army and fought a war? My ancestors joined the army during the founding war of the Daqing state. An army of tens of thousands of brothers, 80 to 90% of them died in a month. Do you think we don't fight anymore? Last night when we fought against that old demon, none of us were cowards. Now that we have walked out safely, have you lost your guts? As soon as he shouted, the soldiers stopped talking and shrank their heads. But after a while, someone suddenly said, "Squad leader, we are not afraid of death. We are just afraid of dying in vain. That demon is not something that we can deal with. Are we going to Tongtian Swamp to fight against the demon?" Su Mao stared at the person who spoke. "Ning Hut, you are usually the most courageous one. Are you scared out of your wits today?" Being called out by Su Mao, the soldier named Ning Hutu stopped hiding. He also straightened his neck. "Granduncle, I am not scared out of my wits. I just don't want to hit a stone with an egg." Su Mao was furious. He jumped up and pointed at him. "Little bastard, what did you say? Do you know that you are disturbing the morale of the army? You will be killed on the battlefield without saying a word." Ding Min's side stood up and pulled him back. "Okay. It is not a battlefield now." Seeing that his young granduncle was angry, Ning Hutu sat down embarrassedly, but the others looked even more depressed. Someone even talked about the state of Yu. It is said that the state of Yu is now occupied by demons. Even the emperor of the state of Yu has to listen to the demons. Those demons even eat the officials. This was a half-truth, but the problem was that few of the more than 40 soldiers knew the situation of the state of Yu. It was not convenient to travel in this era, and there were not many channels of information. Moreover, the two countries were separated by a long range of mountains. For a moment, the small camp was gloomy and gloomy. It seemed that even the bonfire could not drive away the chill of autumn. But suddenly he heard someone laughing. "A bunch of idiots." Li Yunxin sat on a bag of red soil covered with a quilt. He pinched a handful of red soil in his hand and sneered, "Don't you know that mortals also have magical powers? Don't you know that all of you are now practicing this magical power?" The mysterious but bad-tempered Taoist master was originally sitting far away from the group of dirty soldiers, enjoying scones and wine alone. Now that he suddenly said such a thing, everyone was stunned for a moment. If ordinary people said this, they would definitely be pressed to the ground and beaten up by these soldiers. But when Li Yunxin said this, no one responded. They had all seen his methods. Perhaps they were unwilling, but they knew that he was a real master. Although the words of a master were unpleasant to hear, they should be reasonable, right? After a moment of awkward silence, someone suddenly said loudly, "What is the magical power that Taoist master is talking about? Why don't we know about it?" Everyone looked at the person who spoke. It turned out to be the soft-skinned Yen heir. They did not know what was wrong with this kid. At this moment he actually became bold and his tone was somewhat unconvinced. But in fact, Su Mao knew that among the 4 scouts who died last night, one of them was Yen heir's best friend. Thus he was depressed the whole day. Now that he heard Li Yunxin's sarcastic words, he could not control his temper. But this Taoist master might be in a good mood today, or perhaps he wanted to show off, so he did not get angry. Instead, he lazily leaned against the red soil bag and narrowed his eyes at them. "Let me ask you, an ordinary village brute would find it difficult to fight a vicious wolf and might even lose his life. But how did you kill over a dozen fierce beasts last night? If this brute later joined the army and became some kind of captain. When he said this, he raised his hand and pointed at Ding Min. Now this captain remembers that he was injured by a vicious wolf and wants to take revenge. Wouldn't it be easy to take you 40 idiots back to find that vicious wolf and kill it? If this captain later becomes the emperor, the Qing emperor. At this point Ding Min turned pale with fright. She quickly waved her hand and said in a low voice, Taoist Hunyunzi, you can't say such things carelessly. But Li Yunxin completely ignored her and only continued to say, after he becomes the emperor he is now very unhappy with the Yu kingdom. So, with one order, with just one sentence, thousands of troops and horses came out in full force and flattened the Yu kingdom in one night. Is that still a difficult matter? At this point think about it again. In the past he was just a brute who couldn't even defeat a vicious wolf. Later, with just one sentence he destroyed a country. In the eyes of that wolf. Isn't this an incredible magic? When Li Yunxin said this, everyone was stunned. Even Ding Min didn't say anything and only furrowed her brows slightly. He sneered, the divine abilities that I cultivate and the demons and devils cultivate are called spells. And the magic that this brute cultivates is called politics. You're born as humans, so you're used to the supernatural power of politics and you're used to it. Until last night when you saw the demon's magic, you felt it was incomprehensible and terrifying. But think about it. When those normal beasts saw you, dozens of people walking together for no reason, working together to divide the work and kill, did they not find it incomprehensible and terrifying? This worldly people's magic of politics has been cultivated to the peak. For example, your Qing emperor 500 years ago changed dynasties and became emperor. Immortals overturned rivers and seas with the raising of their hands and feet. Could your emperor not use one sentence to flatten mountains and fill rivers? This Ding Min only needs one sentence to have you all kill and die. Does no one find it strange? After saying this, he snorted and went back to minding his own business and drinking his wine. It was the soldiers in the camp who looked at each other. After a while they reacted and whispered to each other. No one had ever thought of what Li Yunxin had said. Although it sounded absurd and uninhibited, thinking about it carefully it made some sense. In this world, other than humans, what other animal could create dynasty after dynasty, build city after city, be equipped with armor like them, and kill a dozen ferocious beasts unscathed? Could it be that it was already very mystical but he had gotten used to it? Regardless of whether these soldiers thought it through or not, after hearing Li Yunxin's words, some courage grew in their hearts, even if the situation had not changed and they were still the same as last night. Ding Min froze for a long time before he walked in front of Li Yunxin and cupped his hands in salute. Ding Min has benefited greatly from your words. It is also thanks to your words that these children. Li Yunxin twitched his mouth. I can't be bothered to cheer you on. It's just that I see you are filial and can't bear to see a group of idiots ruin my mood. He looked young but always said that Ding Min, a man who had already passed his prime, was filial. Ding Min did not care. He had seen the world and knew that these cultivators only looked young. This Taoist priest Hunyuanzi's personality was actually very similar to the old man in his family. When people get old, their temperaments become strange and they become more like children. This Taoist priest Hunyuanzi should be in his 60s or 70s. His cultivation is profound after all. Ding Min thought so in his heart. Thus he only bowed again, took 3 steps back and walked away. When he returned to the fire and sat down, he felt that the atmosphere was much livelier. Su Mao glanced at Li Yunxin and said to Ding Min, "This Taoist master doesn't have a bad heart." Ding Min smiled shamefully. "I thought that he really wanted us to serve him, that's why he saved us. But now he killed an old monster with one slap. This kind of old immortal doesn't need anyone to serve him. Maybe he is afraid that we will encounter demons again and wants to protect us." After saying this, he thought for a while and said, "I think so. What do you think?" "I hope so." Su Mao frowned slightly. It can be said that he saw General Shui and his men being slaughtered by demons but was powerless to do anything. Now he feels guilty. It can be said that he has other intentions, but he doesn't look like a bad person. In my opinion, boss, let's... At this time they suddenly heard rustling sounds coming from the west side of the forest. It did not sound like a beast. Then a soldier in tattered clothes rushed out of the forest. Seeing their camp, he was slightly surprised at first and then shouted, "Run! There are demons!" Chapter 381. If this soldier had appeared earlier before Li Yunxin had said those words, perhaps one word would have caused chaos in the camp. But at this moment, Li Yunxin's words were still ringing in their ears. Seeing him like this and hearing his words, the soldiers did not panic. Instead, everyone first looked at Daoist Hunyuanzi, and then at his team leader. But the deserter had no intention of arguing with them. The shout was probably a subconscious reaction. Seeing that they were indifferent, he ignored them and jumped down the hill about to pass through their camp. At that time they could see his appearance clearly. Based on the style of his armor, he did not seem to be a soldier of the Qin kingdom. There were bloodstains on his shoulders and legs, which did not look like his own. He held a short knife in his hand, but the knife was clean. It was obvious that he had turned and fled when he saw that the situation was not good. Thus, it was fine that he did not have a weapon. But since he had a knife, how could they let him pass through the camp with a weapon? If a soldier from another country had rushed over like this, they would have shot him on the spot without saying anything. But because they had seen demons before, Ding Min only shouted in a low voice, "Take him down." Taking him down was easy. He was already staggering when he ran. A soldier stretched out his leg and tripped, immediately falling flat on his face. When he tried to get up again, two big men had already pressed down on him and held him down. This guy was probably really scared. He immediately struggled with all his might, shouting, "There's a demon. Can't you hear me? If you don't want to live, let me go." Ouch. As he shouted, he struggled with all his might. The two people actually could not hold him down. Su Mao immediately got up and walked to his side. He bent down and gave him 4 slaps. Slap, 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 slap. He immediately became dizzy and did not shout anymore. Then he looked at him sternly. "Where are you from? What demon did you meet? Where are you? Where are your people?" But the soldier was stunned for a moment. He could only stare at him, unable to speak. Ding Min also stood up and slightly frowned. From his accent, he should be from the Yi kingdom. Then she turned her head and looked around. Suddenly, her expression changed. "Get up." Footsteps could be heard in the forest. It sounded like there were a lot of people, but it was not chaotic. Rustling sounds could be heard as they passed through the forest with withered leaves. For a moment, it was impossible to tell how many people there were. 4 scouts had died last night and they only stopped for a short rest at noon, so they did not send out any scouts. After hearing Ding Min's words, everyone picked up their armors and weapons. Just as they stood up, they suddenly saw a flash of cold light in the forest. It should be the sunlight reflected off the bright ironware. In the next moment, with a swoosh, an arrow pierced through the air, pierced through the gap between the 2 soldiers who were pressing down on the soldier from Yi country and nailed him to the ground. This arrow was different from the arrows used by the Qing soldiers. The shaft was thicker and longer and the tail feathers were black. At this moment, the 2 men who were holding down the soldier were dumbfounded. They saw that half of the arrow had sunk into the ground, and the tail was buzzing and trembling incessantly. This arrow was sharp and ruthless. It hit the soldier right in the middle of his back, immediately killing him. Earlier, this soldier had rushed into the camp in a panic, which was already a great taboo in marching. Now the person who fired the arrow had killed the captive in their camp with 1 arrow. It was practically a declaration of war without saying anything else. Seeing that it was the method of mortals and not some evil magic, these Qing soldiers were not very afraid. A few squad leaders gave the order, and the 40 or so people immediately formed a formation. The archers under Su Mao's command did not say anything. They drew their bows and shot a round of arrows into the forest. This round was not to hurt people but to suppress the momentum of the newcomers. As expected, they immediately heard someone shout in the forest. "How dare you shoot? How dare you? Where are you from?" Hearing this accent, Ding Min and Su Mao looked at each other and said in a low voice, "People from Li." Li was the largest country in the world, and it was separated from Qing by a narrow and long Yi country. But this did not mean that the 2 sides did not border each other. The territory of the Li kingdom stretched out to the south from the east, bordering both the Yi kingdom and the Qing kingdom. It was like a knife stuck into the bodies of both countries. Ding Min had been guarding the border before and she had been guarding that border. The Li military was strong and there were usually no large-scale wars between the countries, so the soldiers often caused trouble. Occasionally causing trouble at the border was something that the generals tacitly agreed to. Because there was no war in the world, soldiers had to be trained. Soldiers could not always be trained to fight bandits. In the eyes of the regular army, bandits were no different from newly captured able-bodied men. Thus, there were occasional small conflicts at the border, and they were some kind of practice that both sides agreed on. Ding Min knew that because the Li kingdom was in the north, the people of the Li were taller and thicker than the people of Yi and Qing. They were also rude and unreasonable. This could be seen from the arrows they used. The shafts of the arrows were all longer and thicker than those of the Qing army. The position they were in was actually not very far from the border of the Li kingdom. So it was not strange for the soldiers of the Li kingdom to appear here. Just now it was indeed their arrogant and unreasonable style. But why did they kill the soldiers of Yi country? Ding Min raised her hand and told the archers to stop shooting. Then she said in a loud voice, "This is under the banner of the fire battalion of the Daqing State's Zhichong army. Which Li side is in the forest?" There was no immediate response. After about 10 breaths of time, a figure slowly appeared in the forest. From a glance there were a lot of people. There were nearly 100 of them. These people stood on the hill with the sun behind them looking down from above. They wore black armor and leather helmets. However, the leather helmets were pressed very low, and the contours of their faces were sharp and angular. Thus they appeared to have a stern and cold aura. There were about 20 archers with bows drawn and arrows aimed at them. There were also about 40 heavily armored soldiers. Ding Min recognized the attire of the Li army's heavily armored cavalry. However, they were in the forest right now, so they had probably abandoned their horses and walked. The rest were sword and shield bearers and long spear bearers. There was not much difference in the configuration of the Qing army. However, these people looked at them coldly and did not speak. They were also larger than the Qing army. In this autumn afternoon, they formed a pressure that made it difficult for one to breathe. This stalemate continued for another 15 minutes. Only then did a sturdy man wearing full armor walk to the front of the forest. His chin was shaved black. He first glanced at Li Yunxin and then at Ding Min. In a loud voice he said, "You are very daring. You dare to shoot arrows at the Li army. The fire battalion of the Zhichong army? Ah." Speaking to this point he laughed loudly. Does anyone still have the face to mention this name? Thousands of people being wiped out in one wave in Redstone Gorge is already the joke of the various armies. You southern barbarians can't fight, but you're good at sending yourself to death. After he said this, the Qing army immediately became angry. Ding Min raised his hand again and did not allow them to speak. He only said with a stern face, "I am Captain Ding Min. Which dude are you?" The military system of the Li army was different from that of the Qing army. 100 people formed a capital with a dutu. Looking at their numbers, it should be the military strength of a capital. Yen Er said angrily from within the formation, "Leader, what are these bastards saying? Let me teach them a lesson." Ding Min tilted her face slightly and said in a low voice, "Hold your arrows well. These people are difficult to deal with." What he wanted to say was, "We are not a match for them." Heavy armored cavalry was rare in any army, yet there were 40 of them in the capital. Ding Min had seen this kind of army on the border. The Li people called them the Roaring Plunder Army. The heavy armored soldiers had mounts. The light armored soldiers and archers also had mounts. They became light cavalry. When they marched they came and went like the wind, cruel and merciless. They guarded the border all year round. Not only did they not think much of the border armies of other countries, but they would also plunder the Li merchant caravans if they were in a good mood. If they were in a good mood they would probably even kill people. Right now they had killed a Li soldier in front of their eyes. If they became violent it would be difficult to guarantee that they would start fighting. At that time they would not be able to gain any advantage. The Li Duta provoked again and again, but Ding Min remained calm and restrained. Thus the Duta seemed to feel bored. He frowned and snorted, "Southern barbarians. What a spineless piece of trash." Then he said, "I am the Dali Duta Diwu Jing. Are you guys here to transport red clay? Where are you going?" Hearing him say his name, Li Yunxin, who was standing to the side, looked at him a few more times. Diwu was a compound surname. In this world almost all people with compound surnames had ancestors of the royal family. However, some of them were from hundreds of years ago and some were from thousands of years ago. This surname was not common, but he had heard of it once in the city of Wei. It was the ghost emperor of the abandoned palace in the city of Wei. He was the general of the Jin Wu guards under Lu Xingyang, the former Zhou emperor of Dai. At this time the Qing soldier's neck was red with anger, but Ding Min's expression did not change. So you are the Diwu Dutu. These people are indeed going to Tongtianzhe to transport red earth, for the world's Xianmen and for the welfare of the common people. I just heard this Yi soldier say that he encountered demons. Diwu Jing laughed disdainfully. Demons? We already killed them. Then he looked at the body of the Yi soldier. This coward. He was supposed to be our guide in the mountains, but he turned and ran when he saw demons. Deserters, no matter where they run, will die. You people are also deserters? Escaped from Redstone Gorge? Ding Min said in a low voice. We are not deserters. We are. At this point the atmosphere had already relaxed a little. Thus when Diwu Jing asked arrogantly, Ding Min answered neither humbly nor overbearingly, making the matter clear. Their Li army had entered the Yi kingdom from the eastern border. Because the world was working for the Xianmen Yi Yu and the Qing people were transporting red earth to Tongtianzhe, the Li army had to protect and escort. Diwu Jing's group was patrolling in the nearby mountains with 3 Yi soldiers as their guide. Not only did they have secular soldiers, but they also had a Xianmen swordsman. They were lucky that they did not encounter any great fiendish demons with remarkable powers. Instead they encountered small fries like the old fox demoness from before. It did not take much effort for the Xianmen swordsman to deal with these demons, so the Li soldiers slowly lost their fear. Chapter 382. Just now the sword cultivator did encounter a slightly more troublesome one. He claimed to be the chief of mountain patrol Zhuanfeng, who was appointed by the great general of Yujun under the lord of Tongtian. It took the sword cultivator a lot of effort to kill him. When the 3 Yi soldiers saw the magical power of the demon, they were scared out of their wits. They felt that they couldn't win, so they turned and ran here. After taking care of the demon, the Li army gave chase. They caught up to him in the Qing army's camp and shot him dead with 1 arrow. After explaining all of this, another person walked out from the Li army. This person's appearance was not extraordinary. In fact, it should be said that he was extremely ugly. He had a protruding mouth and monkey cheeks. A few thin strands of beard grew from the side of his lips, but it was yellow. His body was also short. He was shrunk into a green Daoist robe. He looked like a temple attendant who did odd jobs in a Taoist temple in the countryside. However, these arrogant Li soldiers seemed to be extremely respectful towards him. They had originally looked at the Qing army with disdain. When he walked out, these tall soldiers lowered their eyes and automatically made a path for him. This was probably the swordsman Kong Tongzi, who had killed countless demons and had magical powers that Diwu Jing spoke of. This swordsman walked to Diwu Jing's side and swept his gaze down expressionlessly. He first saw Li Yunxin. He furrowed his brows slightly. His first impression was not good. This guy was very pretty. He didn't like him. Feeling slightly unhappy, the swordsman Kong Tongzi looked at the Qing soldiers again and said, "On the way here, did you see any demons?" Diwu Jing heard him ask this and immediately laughed. "Taoist priest, you have asked too much. If these southern barbarians saw demons, they would have long died. Would they still be standing here?" Kong Tongzi turned his head and glanced at him. This strong man, who was a full 2 heads taller than Kong Tongzi, immediately stopped talking. He bowed slightly and smiled embarrassedly. Good. I spoke too much again." Kong Tongzi turned his face again to look at Ding Min. Ding Min glanced at Li Yunxin. Seeing that Taoist Hunyuanzi was still leaning against the wall, ignoring them, he said, replying to Sendo, "I did encounter a demon." Diwu Jing was stunned by his words. Ding Min continued, "Last night I met a fox demon. His brothers did not let him take advantage of them and killed more than 10 of the beasts he commanded. Later on, the fox demon used her sorcery and we couldn't defeat her. It's all thanks to this." As he spoke, he cupped his hands towards Li Yunxin and said, "Daoist Hunyuanzi, we're safe because you killed the old fox." He did not say how Li Yunxin had killed the fox demon. Actually, he really wanted to say that if he said that Daoist priest Hunyuanzi could kill the enemy effortlessly, he would be able to boost his prestige when facing the Li army. He could tell from Li Yunxin's accent that he was a Qing man to the core. However, he was, after all, a meticulous, experienced and prudent person. Thus he felt that since these Sendo had different doors and all practiced Xianmen, then each of their methods would not be easily made public. It was just like how people on the Jianghu guarded their martial arts very strictly. He wasn't sure if he would accidentally reveal Daoist Hunyuanzi's secret once he spoke of his methods, so he could only casually say it. After saying all this, he looked at Li Yunxin and found that the Taoist did not show any displeasure. He secretly felt that he had guessed correctly. Hearing his words, Kong Tongzi thought for a moment. Without looking at Li Yunxin, he only said to Ding Min, "What happened last night? Tell me in detail. Tell me about the demon." Ding Min then recounted all of the old fox's actions. When he was about to get to the part where Li Yunxin killed the enemy and was hesitating about how to say it, Kong Tongzi waved his hand and said, "Forget it." Then he smiled and said, "So it's just a little demon that hasn't transformed into a human." After hearing Ding Min describe the old fox's methods, he knew its realm. This kind of demon, not to mention the people of Xianmen. Even some unorthodox Daoists with high cultivation and extraordinary talents would be able to subdue them. Thus he didn't want Ding Min to talk about Hunyuanzi's magical powers. What kind of magical powers were needed to deal with this kind of little demon? For him it was just a matter of summoning a flying sword in 2 or 3 moves. After laughing, he returned to his expressionless face and muttered to himself in a low voice, "General Honghua." He had been patrolling around the area with the E-Capital's Li army and killed many demons. Many of the little demons in the Xianmen realm were easily taken care of. Occasionally he would meet an emptiness realm, but it wasn't difficult. Until today he met a mountain patrol chief drilling wind. It was a yellow-furred lynx that was about to reach the peak of the emptiness realm. Thus it took a lot of effort. And these demons all said that they were under the command of the General Honghua. Kong Tongzi was a Kenzo cultivator. It wasn't his idea to come out with the Li army. In fact, there were many low-level cultivators like him. They were all in small teams of about 100 people and each had their own area. They were, in fact, the scouts of the alliance of Xianmen and mortals. The demons were spying on the Xianmen and the Xianmen were spying on them. These days he had gradually figured out the situation in the mountains. The most powerful demon in this vast area was probably this General Honghua. According to the description of the demon he killed, General Honghua's cultivation was not low. He should be in the transcendent state. His chances of winning against a transcendent state demon were very low, close to 0. Thus he planned to go back and report everything and ask the other martial brothers to make a decision. And it was said that General Honghua's superior was Yu Jun. He had heard of Yu Jun. He was a true state demon. He wouldn't be able to meet a demon king of this level. True state demons were all characters who ruled over an area. They were high up and would never appear in the wilderness. Once they went out, they would be followed by a large number of demon soldiers and demon generals. Even a Xianmen sect would have to deal with them seriously. Thus, when Kong Tongzi thought of this, he turned to Diwu Jing and said, "Let's stop here. Since these people are going to Tongtian Lake to transport the red soil as a Xianmen cultivator, I have the responsibility to protect them. I will go with them and send them out of the Manwan Mountains." The people in the Li army had only heard of demons, but they had never seen one. These days, as Kong Tongzi killed many demons in the Manwan Mountains, he was no longer afraid. He even felt that it wasn't enough. Now that he heard that they were going to leave, he was very unhappy. But he couldn't disobey Kong Tongzi. Without this Taoist priest, it would be very difficult for them to deal with the demons. So Diwu Jing frowned, looked at Ding Min and spat, "These cowardly southern barbarians." He thought that this Taoist priest had to escort the red soil, so they had to leave. What he didn't know was that Kong Tongzi had already investigated the situation nearby and felt that he had killed many low-level demons these days. If he didn't leave, then the general of Red Flame would personally come out and he wouldn't be able to leave. The Li army was very unhappy and the Qing army was also very unhappy. Although it would be much safer to have another cultivator with them, who would like the Li army's arrogance? Ding Min didn't answer and tilted his head to look at Li Yunxin. Kong Tongzi saw the look in his eyes and also turned his head. He saw Li Yunxin lazily bathing in the sun and slightly squinting at him. The autumn sun shone on his face. His face was very handsome and his skin was as white as jade. She was tall and slender with well-proportioned muscles. Her slender and powerful fingers were currently holding a water pouch and playing with it. She had an otherworldly and elegant demeanor. When this sword cultivator saw this, he couldn't help but feel annoyed. He furrowed his brows slightly and said in a low voice, "Friend, which sect are you from?" Li Yunxin yawned and said, I don't belong to any sect. Kong Tongzi raised his eyebrows and understood. Painter? Li Yunxin smiled. Is that right? The annoyance in Kong Tongzi's heart suddenly disappeared without a trace, and he felt much more open-minded. So, he was just a painter. It was not much different from what he had thought before. Naturally, he had also heard about the matter of the Qing general's heir bringing a group of masters with him. But the so-called masters of the Qing kingdom were nothing more than painters and wild Daoists. Since this beautiful young man was an artist, how long could his beauty last? In another 10 years his face would age, and in another few decades he would turn into a pile of yellow earth. These so-called painters and wild Daoists did not cultivate the great Xianmen path. They were just mortals who had some power that did not belong to them. And he was a cultivator of the Xianmen path. Their lifespans would lengthen because of cultivation. If they were lucky they would live forever and even become immortals. What was the use of arguing with this mortal? Thus he turned his head and no longer paid attention to Li Yunxin. He said to Ding Min in a low voice, "Come with us. Along the way there's no need to worry about any monsters." After saying this he waved his sleeve and disappeared into the forest. Diwu Jing also glared at Ding Min and said in a rough voice, "You heard what I said. I'll give you 15 minutes to break camp." Thus 15 minutes later, these two groups of people with completely different backgrounds were on the road. The Li army was in front, and there were a number of horses accompanying them. Going down the mountain from here the road was much smoother. Although they couldn't urge the horses to move, it was not a big problem for the war horses to walk. The Qing army was behind, escorting the Red Earth. Their pack horses were loaded and short-footed, so their speed was slower. The Li army was impatient and loudly scolded them. Some of the Qing army were angry, but they were all suppressed by Ding Min. After traveling like this for 2 hours, Yan Er couldn't take it anymore. He ran from the front of the group to the middle and followed Ding Min's horse. As he walked, he raised his face and asked, "What do we have to be angry about? We worked so hard to transport the Red Earth, and halfway there we were robbed by the Li people. When we get there they will take a share of the credit and they will talk dirty along the way. Captain, are we afraid of them to this extent?" Ding Min listened to him with a straight face. She knew that these were the thoughts of the soldiers beside her. After thinking for a moment she said in a low voice, "Yanzi, when you go to the border and see these Li people, you will understand. Usually they dare to slaughter their own villages on the border of the Li kingdom and kill innocent people to take credit. Not to mention in this war. These people are the howling raiding army. Rather than an army they are more like armed bandits. If there is a real conflict, do you want your brothers to lose a few more lives in this endless mountain just because of a moment of anger?" Speaking to this point he lowered his head and looked at Yan Er. Chapter 383. When Yan Er heard this he opened his mouth but did not know what to say. He was a young man who was impulsive and aggressive, but he wasn't stupid. When he heard Ding Min mention the howling raiding army, he knew that it was one of the strongest and most powerful troops in the world. They had more people and were more imposing. Even so he was still angry and kicked the ground as he walked. "I don't like that Daoist priest either. He's shifty-eyed." This voice was echoed by many people. But they only lowered their voices and whispered to each other. They couldn't find trouble with the Li army or the swordsmen, so this was the only way to vent their anger, but they didn't dare to say it out loud. It was really suffocating. Ding Min and Su Mao exchanged glances. Their morale was raised. At first they were scared when they met the demons. Then Daoist Hunyuanzi calmed them down. Then they met the Li people. They found that these arrogant Li people didn't care about the demons and looked down on them, so the soldiers were motivated. With this motivation they became more courageous. At this moment the fear in his heart had completely vanished. Ding Min sighed in his heart. It's okay to be angry. He finally brought these children out of Manwan Mountain. Then he turned to look at Li Yunxin. He found that Li Yunxin's face was still calm. He was riding a dwarf horse and walking with the troops. He was either resting with his eyes closed or enjoying the scenery. He was arrogant when he appeared last night and he didn't seem to care about anyone now. He didn't want to talk to these soldiers. Ding Min couldn't help but compare. This Daoist Hunyuanzi or that swordsman Kong Tongzi, who was stronger. Because he saved his life last night and what he said about politics in the camp. Ding Min hoped that this Daoist Hunyuanzi was stronger. But he heard Li Yunxin call himself a painter. He knew about painters. In the secular world, famous painters had a higher status than unorthodox Daoists. This unruly Taoist did not only refer to those Taoist priests who roamed the Jianghu without a place to rely on, but also included those Taoist priests who had Taoist temples and were under the orders of the imperial court. These Daoist priests did not belong to the 36 paradises or the 72 sections. Thus, they were commonly referred to as wild Daoist priests. However, compared to the Daoist priests or cultivators of the grotto heavens and sects, the identity of an artist was not worth mentioning. Ding Min felt that this Daoist priest Primordial Chaos was a great artist. But no matter how powerful they were, they couldn't be compared to the people of the grotto heaven sect. It was said that the emperor had once wanted to meet a female Daoist from the grotto heaven, but the female Daoist completely ignored him. The emperor did not even dare to get angry. Kong Tongzi had spoken rudely to him, but Daoist master Hunyuanzi didn't retort. Ding Min felt that perhaps this proud Daoist master of theirs was weak in front of cultivators. Actually, when he thought about it, he also felt suffocated. Thus, he pulled on the reins slightly and had the warhorse beneath him slow down. He wanted to get closer to Daoist master Hunyuanzi and talk to him. For example, what did this Daoist master think of the Li army? Should they follow all the way or fight to find another path on their own? At this moment he suddenly heard an order come from the front, telling them to stop. Their group of 140 people snaked along the mountain path like a long snake. The order from the front took a long time to arrive. When Ding Min heard the order, he thought about it and turned his horse onto a small hill by the side of the road to look forward. He found that the Li army at the very front was talking to some other soldiers. Right now they were going downhill. The group at the front had turned a corner, so there were a few trees with golden leaves covering them. He could not see clearly. He asked the people at the front what had happened. The order came slowly. The Qing army at the very front didn't know. They only knew that they seemed to have encountered another army in the forest and were asking about their background and purpose. Ding Min narrowed his eyes and looked for a while. However, the people at the front at the foot of the mountain were only the length of a finger. They were 200 meters away and couldn't be seen clearly. He was a soldier and wasn't used to waiting blankly. He turned his head and said, "Yan go ahead and see what happened." Yan received the order and immediately jumped onto the grassy slope beside the mountain path. He jogged over, kicking up a trail of dust under the sunlight. However, it only took half an incense stick's time before it returned. His neck was flushed red and his face was full of indignation. When he reached Ding Min's horse he cursed, "See, these northern bearded men are too much." But he also knew the importance of the matter. After cursing, he immediately said, "They stopped me from coming back when I was far away. They didn't say anything and just chased me away. Captain, are these northern bearded men going to defame us?" Ding Min furrowed his brows and looked forward. He lowered his head and asked, "Did you see who they were?" Yan panted heavily. "I don't know where they are from, but from a distance their armor was clear and they were very big, even bigger than the northern bearded men. I only got a rough look, but I can't tell where they are from." Ding Min was slightly stunned. "You can't tell either?" Yan was brought by Su Mao. Although he was young, he had seen a lot. From the south to the north of the Qing kingdom, he had seen all kinds of military camps in the past 5 years. He was also trained as an elite scout, so he was very knowledgeable. But now that he said this, it meant that the army that appeared in front of them was completely unfamiliar to him. He couldn't even guess the possibility of who they were. In the mountains, there were people from the Qing kingdom, Yi kingdom, Yu kingdom, Li kingdom, Qin kingdom and Lai kingdom. Yan said he couldn't tell which army they were from. Ding Min looked at Su Mao. The two of them thought for a while. Ding Min said, "I'll go and take a look." He was an old soldier and naturally didn't like situations that were out of his control. The feeling of not knowing anything was the most worrisome thing. Su Mao nodded. "Yan you go with him." At this moment Li Yunxin, who had been silent all the way, said, "Don't go if you don't want to die." His voice was still the same, lazy, slow and a little cynical, as if he was playing a game. Ding Min might have been unhappy with what he said last night. But now he said it and Ding Min was stunned. He suddenly turned his head. "Master Taoist, what do you mean?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Let's wait and see." Diwu Jing, the commandant of the Li Kingdom's roaring army, was a big man. He was tall and strong, had a bad temper and was ready to curse when he opened his mouth. But he was actually very careful. If he wasn't careful, he wouldn't have been able to become a centurion. So when this army walked out of the forest, he frowned. If it was the Qing Kingdom's roaring army, Yi Kingdom's army, or Yu Kingdom's army, if he was in a good mood, he would first look at them coldly and then ask their officers to come out and talk to him. He was the commandant of the Li Kingdom's roaring army. Even a commander in those armies had to talk to him politely, not to mention a squad leader. But this group, he had never seen them before. Their vanguard turned around this small hill and suddenly ran into two big men standing straight in the middle of the road. They were all strong, with backs of tigers and waists of bears. They wore heavy horned helmets. The helmets were dark red, decorated with tall pheasant feathers, and looked very gorgeous. They wore colorful armor, not leather armor but iron armor. Bright iron scales were embedded on the dark red thick skin, and colorful python leather belts were tied around their waists. They wore black boots with clouds on their feet. These two big men held heavy iron spears in their hands, blocking the road like door gods. They didn't panic when they saw the Li Kingdom's army. They only shouted in a low voice, "Our general has ordered that anyone who passes through this place must dismount and wait for investigation." The gorgeous armor they wore seemed to be ceremonial armor. But Diwu Jing saw a lot of knife and axe marks on it, and also saw black blood stains between the gaps. This meant that the owner of the armor really wore it to fight. Seeing the gap on the heavy iron spear, he knew it must have been a very fierce battle. To be able to use this kind of heavy iron spear, it would not be a spearhead that looked like silver. His roaring army was famous in the world. Why didn't he know there was such a strong army? Which great general was it that was so arrogant as to show off his might and show off his ostentatiousness in the mountains? So he sent someone to ask. As a result, the two big men only said this one sentence and didn't say anything else. Diwu Jing was unhappy and was about to go forward himself. But he saw dozens of strong men wearing the same colorful armor coming out of the forest. He was so shocked that he stopped the horse. How could he not know? The armor on the big man was enough to exchange for the armor of all of them. Now these dozens of burly men were dressed like this. Could it be that the Grand Marshal of the armed forces had arrived? He was a soldier, so he knew his limits and restrained his temper. But Kong Tongzi was an outsider. He was already afraid of the demons in the mountains looking for trouble and was in a hurry to leave. Now he suddenly saw some idiot from some family putting on a show of power here. He had long become impatient. Squeezing his legs, he urged his horse forward. He raised his hand and pointed at the strong man in colorful armor and shouted, "Who is your general? Call him out to see me. Do you mortals think that you can block the arrival of my sword sex Wuyu sword faction's Kong Tongzi?" At this time, someone reported from behind that a spy from the Qing army had come to ask what was going on. Speaking of the Qing army, Kong Tongzi thought of the handsome painter. So he didn't turn his head and only shouted, "Tell him to get back." Then he looked at the strong man. "Are you deaf?" At this time, the sound of a horn and the rumbling of drums suddenly rang out in the dense forest. Then the trees on the side of the road swayed. Countless birds flew up from the forest. It seemed that a large army had arrived. Hearing this formation, Diwu Jing was so anxious he was about to break out in a sweat. Although the howling lashing army was a strong army, they came and went like the wind. Now some unknown general had made such a ruckus. Did he not know that the thousands of people from the Qing kingdom had all been destroyed in Redstone Gorge? Then two groups of black-helmeted and black-armored knife and shield bearers surged out of the forest and formed a line in front of them. Then two rows of golden-helmeted and golden-armored double-axemen opened the way and formed a line behind them. Then, surrounded by many colorful armored soldiers, a general wearing a bright red battle robe and riding a white horse slowly walked out of the forest. Diwu Jing, Kong Tongzi, and the people of the Li army all froze when they saw this general. ***** Note. Silver like a wax spearhead, not a silver like wax spearhead. Yes, lead and tin alloy, not wax. Too many idioms and words have had to compromise with the public and change their original meaning to the wrong meaning because they have been misused on a large scale for a long time, and because of widespread misuse. For example, wind from an empty cave. It originally meant, the matter has a basis. Behind each idiom and word is a story that has been passed down for thousands of years. It is almost a microcosm of a certain period of history. Chinese is a language with a story and a life. I really don't want many years from now when our descendants speak a word, to think about what the original wish was, what the meaning is now because it has been misused by others. So, within the limits of my ability, I will mark out the words that are easy to make mistakes. If I have used them incorrectly, I hope everyone can point them out. I am really a good writer. Chapter 384. It was a female general. The people of the Li Kingdom were tough, and the status of men and women was more equal than that of the southern countries. It was not uncommon to see women as officials, and there was even a light eyebrow battalion in the army. But even so, they had never seen a woman as a general. Although the military system of each country was different, the general was definitely a military officer of the upper 3 ranks, and they had never heard of a woman holding this position. But the one in front of them, as a woman, she was not very beautiful. Although she had red lips and white teeth, she had a pair of thick eyebrows and big eyes. Her face was slightly square and her nose was high. If she was a man, she would be considered handsome, but if she was a woman, she would seem rough. The armor of the previous spear-wielding warriors was gorgeous, but the armor of this general was even more gorgeous. The leather helmet on her head was surrounded by a large group of feathers, and 2 of them were especially long, more than 10 feet long. As the horse moved, the 2 feathers fluttered, looking very imposing. The armor covering her body was also a chain mail. But the edges of the collar, gauntlets, and skirt were covered with thick fur, making her look imposing and mighty. Right now, her face, which was hidden in a large group of feathers, fur, and armor, was expressionless. Surrounded by a group of bodyguards, she slowly rode out of the forest and stopped in the middle of the path. She looked at Diwu Jing condescendingly and then looked at Kong Tongzi. After pondering for a while, she said, "Wuji sword sect? Humph. Is it that great?" After saying this, she raised her hand and pointed at Diwu Jing with the horsewhip in her hand. "Which country's soldier are you from?" When this general heard about Wuji sword sect, her words were full of disdain. Diwu Jing was not sure where she came from. He was not sure. Kong Tongzi also frowned. He was not one of those secluded cultivators, and he also knew some of the ways of the world. So when he heard her words, he was stunned for a while and temporarily suppressed the anger in his heart. "I am the Dutu of the Li Kingdom's raiding army. Under the order of General Ji, I will accompany Kong Tongzi and Sendo to enter Manwan Mountain to protect and eliminate the demon." Diwu Jing frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "May I ask who you are, General?" When the general heard his words, he sneered, "Oh? Eliminate the demon? You guys can also kill demons?" After saying this, he raised his chin as if he was waiting to hear a joke. Then he pointed at Diwu Jing with his horsewhip. "Tell me, what kind of demon did you kill?" Diwu Jing took a deep breath, reporting to the great general. "We are mortals. Naturally, it is difficult for us to slay demons. But this Sendo Kong Tongzi is a Kenzo expert. We're just here to cheer for him. If we're talking about slaying demons, it's all thanks to this Sendo." Seeing that this great general's words were not kind, Diwu Jing did not want to get into trouble. But just because she didn't want to get into trouble didn't mean that she could tolerate the other party's imposing manner. In that case, she could go and find Kong Tongzi. As a mortal, he had to bow his head to the emperor, but that Sendo did not fall for it. However, who was this female general? The female general heard Diwu Jing's words and turned to look at Kong Tongzi. "You? How can someone like him be called Sendo? You have a protruding mouth and monkey-like cheeks. I think you look like a demon. Tell me, what kind of demon did you get rid of?" Kong Tongzi was born ugly, and it was a taboo for others to mention it. When he saw Li Yunxing before, he could comfort himself by saying that the kid was just a painter and would turn into a pile of dirt after a few decades. But now, when he saw the appearance of this great general, he could no longer restrain himself. He frowned and said sternly, "You mortal, how dare you? I didn't argue with you because you have armor, but don't you know your own identity? Slaying demons? All the big and small demons in this mountain were killed by I. Why do you think you can put on a show here and not be taken away by the demons?" The female general was not angry. She sneered again and her eyes became sharp. "Good. So, the land that I personally conferred here and the red-robed old immortal were also killed by you." As soon as she said this, it was like a thunderbolt on a sunny day, exploding in Kong Tongzi's mind. Before he could speak, the female general frowned again and shouted sternly, "Stupid thief! Open your dog eyes and see who I am." As soon as she finished speaking, the soldiers behind her immediately took out 2 big flags. On the left side, on a golden background, was written in big ink characters, "You King's Lady Zhou." On the right side, on a crimson background, was also written in big ink characters, "Red Flame General." Red Flame General. How could Kong Tongzi not be familiar with this name? These days he had killed many small demons in the mountain, and it was said that they were all under the command of the Red Flame General. And the reason why he had to escort the Qing army out of the mountain was because he was worried that the Red Flame General would be angry and find him. He did not think that he would run into her today. After all, his cultivation was not high and he rarely saw big demons. The ones he came into contact with were only small demons. And those small demons either did not have a human form or had strange temperaments. With just one look he could tell that they were not human. The Xian men did not have good things to say about demons. They only said that they were cruel, cunning, and tyrannical. Thus, when Kong Tongzi first saw the Red Flame General, he saw that her subordinates looked like humans and she also looked like a human. Her words and actions were more like that of a normal mortal army, so he did not think anything else. On the other hand, Li Yunxin had long known that the more brilliant a demon was, the more he was no different from a human and had seen more. Thus, when he saw the colorful armored soldiers appear, he knew that they were not human. Kong Tongzi came to a realization, and so did Diwu Jing. For a moment they were stunned on the spot. In the hearts of mortals like him, big demons were all green-faced and ferocious-looking. Who knew that they were more like humans? It was in this moment of shock that the Red Flame General snorted coldly, "Since you have admitted your crime, then accept your punishment. You killed 12 of my generals. Today I will poke 12 holes in your body. If you can survive, humph." As soon as she finished speaking, a black heavy iron spear appeared in her palm out of thin air. She stabbed it towards the front of the Li army. At the foot of the hill a cloud of dust exploded. Immediately more than a dozen Li soldiers were shrouded in it. They could not see their figures. Ding Min and the others were far away, more than 100 meters away. So they saw that the person who looked like a general was talking with Kong Tongzi and Diwu Jing. But after 3 or 4 sentences the general suddenly got angry. With a wave of her arm she took out a long spear from somewhere and threw it forward. In the cloud of dust, flesh and blood immediately flew everywhere. At such a distance it was difficult for them to feel the power of that blow. But they could clearly see that the trees on both sides of the path, which were as thick as the mouth of a bowl, were blown by the rushing airflow in all directions. Then with a series of cracking sounds they were all broken. The stones that flew up were like countless hidden weapons, whizzing randomly through the air. The unlucky ones in the Li army who were slightly closer were hit in the face and eyes by these stones and broken bones and immediately died. Everything happened in an instant. 2 breaths ago, Ding Min was still asking Li Yunxin, "What did the Taoists say?" 2 breaths later, this army of over 100 people was suddenly attacked. Ding Min didn't have time to sigh at how accurate Li Yunxin's words, "If you don't want to die, don't go." She only abruptly jumped off her horse and shouted in a stern voice, "Prepare for battle, prepare for battle." At this moment the Qing army and Li army both knew they had been attacked. The path was narrow. The colorful armored warriors had already formed 2 lines of formation and were waiting for the exhausted, but they were still marching. There were hills and forests on both sides, making it difficult for them to spread out. Even though there were a number of archers in the group, the dust from the attack just now had yet to disperse. Their duties, life and death, were still unknown. How could they shoot randomly? For a moment the people on the rugged path were thrown off their horses and a chaotic mess. Some ran to the sides wanting to take the high ground and shoot. Some yelled for sword and shield soldiers to go save their dutu. There were also some who looked back, suspecting that the Qing army was behind this. On the contrary, Ding Min's group had heard Li Yunxin's words ahead of time and were much calmer. In a moment they finished forming their formation. When they looked at Taoist priest Hunyuanzi again they were all stunned. The 100-man army was in chaos, but this Taoist was sitting steadily on the back of a short horse and standing on a small hill by the side of the road. As he narrowed his eyes and looked ahead with interest, he pulled open the cork of the wine bag Ding Min had given him and took small sips of the wine. It was as if what was ahead was not a battle to the death but a performance. When Ding Min saw the attack just now he knew that it was not something a human could do. Perhaps they had encountered a demon again. He wasn't proficient in dealing with demons. Thus he could only listen to Taoist priest Hunyuanzi's opinion. But now, seeing this Taoist's actions, although it made them feel much calmer, but he shouted in a low voice inside the formation, "Taoist, what do we do now? Should we kill our way up?" He didn't like the way the Li army did things. But if they ran away now, they would be beheaded if people found out about it in the future. If the demon killed all the Li people, it would definitely catch up. They would die either way, so it was better to fight with all their strength. Taoist priest Hunyuanzi smiled and said, "Go up? Go up for what? To die." Then he raised his hand, and in the midst of the chaotic army he lightly pointed at the two raised flags. He said unhurriedly, "Look. Prince Yu's madam's was arrow, an arrow. Red Flame General's arrow, an arrow. But everyone is dressed like a chicken feather. What do you think this Red Flame General's true identity is?" It was at this moment that lightning crackled from within the cloud of dust. A flying sword rushed out with a buzzing sound, circled twice in the air, and then fiercely stabbed down. They also heard Kong Tongzi's voice, "Demon, eat my sword." The Li soldiers had been with Kong Tongzi for a long time, so they all knew this was his voice and his method. Their morale was immediately boosted. Then they heard Diwu Jing's voice again, "Formation. Formation. Archers on both sides spread out and shoot." As soon as he finished speaking, the warriors in colorful armor with spears shouted and pressed forward together. Li Jun's heart calmed down. Finally, there was a method and he pushed it forward. At this time, Li Yunxin turned to look at Ding Min and said, "Can't guess." Chapter 385. How could Ding Min be in the mood to guess this riddle? She said hurriedly, "Priest, if it's a demon, how can we just stand here and watch?" Li Yunxin huffed, "Idiot. Arrow ho. Isn't it just a pheasant? This General Honghua's real body must be a wild chicken. Ha." Then his expression changed and he looked at Ding Min. She has a dozen demon generals under her command, some of them in the realm of wills and emptiness. She looks like a proper person and has a grand entrance. She is at least in the realm of transformation. And look at her demon power. She is at the peak of the realm of transformation. A demon at the peak of the realm of transformation can be considered a small demon king. Kong Tongzi's cultivation is limited and he doesn't have any powerful magical treasures. Right now he is fighting in close combat. I think he will be sent flying in 3 breaths. What are you going up for? Ding Min didn't understand what he said about wills, transcendent, and peak of the realm of transformation. But she knew that he was referring to a demon in front of them, and a powerful one at that. Kong Tongzi could not defeat that guy. Hearing these words, Ding Min and the Qing soldiers were shocked. This Taoist priest Hunyuanzi, was his cultivation even higher than that Kenzo Sendo? They were all martial artists and knew that only when one's martial arts reached a certain level could one see the depth of another person. But this Taoist priest Hunyuanzi was calm and could explain the situation in front of them. Could it really be? Just as they were thinking of this, there was another rumble in front of them. It shook the ground under their feet 3 times. They saw a figure fly out from the cloud of dust and fog and crash into a small hill to the side. Immediately half of the hill collapsed. They had never seen a scene like this before. For a moment they were all stunned. Suddenly the dust on the hill dissipated. It was as Li Yunxin said. It was Kong Tongzi who had been sent flying. Previously this sword cultivator had been arrogant and insufferably arrogant. Now his nose was bruised and his face was swollen. Even the Taoist bun on his head was a mess. Beside him, a misty green flying sword swayed and flew around him, as if it was protecting its master. But the sword was also flying crookedly as if it would fall at any time. He took 2 deep breaths and seemed to be in a daze. He then saw the Red Flame General riding his horse out from the dust cloud. The swordsman was in a sorry state and General Red Flame seemed to have suffered a loss. One of the 2 long feathers on top of his head had been broken, and the colorful armor on his left arm had also been pierced. The scales of the armor hung down like a chain. The horse took 2 or 3 steps and stopped. The demon stared at Kong Tongzi. "Fine. You do have some skills. You were even able to injure me." He then turned around to look at the Li army who were currently fighting against the warriors in colorful armor. However, the Howling Lu army was a strong army after all. Even though the warriors in colorful armor were not human and each of them had the strength of a calf, the Howling Lu army advanced and retreated methodically. With the help of the long-range archers, they managed to hold their ground and did not collapse. Only 10 of them died and more than 10 were injured. Seeing this scene, General Hong Hua frowned and shouted, "Trash! How did this general train you normally? You still can't take him down." Although she looked like a woman, her words did not have the slightest hint of a woman's weakness. After saying these words, she turned around and shouted, "You guys go." She was referring to the soldiers in black helmets and black armor. Previously, when the colorful armor warriors went up, the black-armored warriors and the gold-armored warriors she brought did not attack. It was as if she treated the Howling Lu army as opponents to train her own soldiers, and let them fight round after round for fun. After giving the order, she turned around and looked at Kong Tongzi. "This general has only pierced 1 hole in your body. There are still 11 holes left. You have to bear with it. If you don't survive 12 holes and dare to die, you see how this general will refine your soul." Seeing all this, Ding Min could not bear it anymore. He stared at Li Yunxin. "Daoist priest, if you don't help, Sendo won't live." "They won't live." Li Yunxin frowned and looked at him. "What does it have to do with me whether he can live or not?" Ding Min was stunned as if she did not expect Li Yunxin to say this. "Daoist priest, you saved us last night. Daoist priest Kong Tongzi is also a human. No matter how dirty he is, we are here to fight against the demons together." Li Yunxin pursed her lips and reached out to slowly remove a fallen leaf from her sleeve. "Have you forgotten? That bastard was rude to me just now." His nose was pointed to the sky. "Now you want me to bury the hatchet and save him? Do I look like someone easy to bully?" When he said these words, all the soldiers beside Ding Min could hear him. At this moment, Yan Er could not bear it anymore and shouted, "Why are you so?" Before he could finish, Su Mao covered his mouth and scolded him in a low voice. "What are you saying?" Li Yunxin was not angry. Instead he laughed and said, "That's right. I am a petty and vengeful person. What can you do about it?" When he said this, these people really did not know what to say. Normally, an expert like Daoist priest Hun Yuanzi should cherish his reputation and be righteous. At least, it seemed. But now he was like this. Ding Min did not know how to describe it and they could not say anything. Therefore, Ding Min gritted her teeth and suddenly cupped her fists toward Li Yunxin. "Daoist priest, thank you for saving my life last night. If we met the Li army on the battlefield and they were enemies, Ding Min, would not be merciful no matter who killed them. But now, since the world is fighting against the demons together, I can't just watch the demons kill without doing anything. Farewell." After saying this, he laughed and shouted, "Abandon the food and water and move forward. Break through from the left." In reality, this order contained the will to die. Li Yunxin quietly made a ha sound. He watched as the 40 Qing soldiers who had been terrified 4 hours ago actually break through from his side without looking sideways. He knew that perhaps there are things to be done and things not to be done. For example, when they faced the demons alone, they would be afraid and terrified and want to live. But now their allies were fighting in front of them and they had no way to escape. That was not called escaping. It was called abandoning the formation. However, he did not expect to see such a thing happen to these small soldiers. Thus, Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and felt, mixing with these people he had finally seen something interesting. In this world there was nothing more interesting than people or the hearts of people. Even so, he smiled and said, "Fine." At this moment, General Hong Hua raised his spear and thrust it toward Kong Tongzi. Seeing Kong Tongzi on his last breath, the flying sword by his side almost fell to his feet. General Hong Hua's heavy spear pierced through the air, heading straight for his left waist. Seemed like she wanted to destroy his snow mountain and Qixi first and then slowly stab the remaining 10 times. But at this moment, Kong Tongzi's eyes suddenly lit up. He reached out and grabbed General Hong Hua's spear. Although demons were known for their strong bodies, but a cultivator's body was not something a normal person could compare to. Earlier he had shown weakness to lure the enemy. Now he had suddenly stopped this witch's weapon. General Hong Hua was stunned. Taking advantage of this moment, the flying sword by his side suddenly flew up like a poisonous snake raising its head. It turned into a bolt of lightning and stabbed toward the witch's face. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The mortals could barely see the general process of what happened. They knew that this was the Kenzo cultivator's plan to deliberately show weakness and lure the enemy. Now they had finally counterattacked. But what Li Yunxin saw was not optimistic at all. He saw that when Kong Tongzi grabbed the witch's spear, a cold smile appeared on the corner of the witch's lips. The meaning of this smile could not be more obvious. The witch had long anticipated that the swordsman would make such a move. Even when the flying sword stabbed toward the witch's face, her smile did not fade. In this instant, a golden mask popped out from the helmet and blocked the flying sword's path. It turned out that this demoness was already prepared and was just playing with Kong Tongzi. Li Yunxing clearly saw all of this. He then looked at the Qing soldiers who had the will to die and were throwing themselves at the demon soldiers. After this thought spun around in his head, he sighed and said, "I don't know what kind of virtue you have accumulated in your last life." Then he gently flicked his pinky. Thus, a trace of the insignificant but extremely terrifying demon power belonging to a true state great demon instantly attached itself to Kong Tongzi's flying sword. Then the flying sword struck General Hong Hua's golden mask. With a loud bang, General Hong Hua and her horse were forced back a dozen steps. Half of the helmet on her head was blown into dust, and the lower half of her face was torn apart, revealing bloody eyes, fascia and even brain matter. But this demon's physical body was strong after all. She had not died after receiving such a heavy injury, and didn't even fall off her horse. However, she was still shocked by the power of this strike. She should have easily blocked this strike and then played with the swordsman. General Hong Hua's arrogance disappeared because of this sword. She sat on the horse in a daze for a while, staring at the equally dazed Kong Tongzi. Then with a scream she turned her horse and ran away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake as she fled into the forest. Once the general left, the demon soldiers that she had abandoned seemed to have lost their souls. They all stood where they were like wooden puppets in an instant. In this daze, a few of them were immediately cut down by the Li army. After another 2 breaths, the Li army and the Qing army finally realized that this wretched-looking swordsman had really beaten back the female demon. For a moment their morale was greatly boosted. They changed from defense to offense and like a swarm of bees they killed their way into the enemy group. But just as they raised their weapons they saw a flash of green light in front of them. The colorful armored, black-armored and golden-armored warriors all disappeared. On the contrary, a nest of colorful golden pheasants suddenly appeared in the forest, flapping their wings and flying away in a disorderly manner. Then they saw dozens of black-armored tortoises in the withered grass on the ground. They were squeezed together and didn't know what to do. Then they saw a group of golden-armored beetles buzzing and dancing in the air. Not long after they also disappeared. They were all transformed from these birds, tortoises and insects. Chapter 386. If this had happened in a legendary novel, it would have been interesting and amazing. But it had appeared on the battlefield. There were still the corpses of their comrades in the grassland. The uneasiness of the crowd filled the air. No one had the mind to think about such an interesting thing. After a moment of shock, the soldiers of the Li army knew that this was the demon's camouflage technique. They didn't need anyone to give the order. They raised the knives at their waists and hacked wildly at the black tortoises. However, the shells of these old tortoises were hard and could not be cut open by normal knives and swords. Thus, they flipped them over and stabbed them into the sockets of their necks, stirring them with force. These big tortoises also bled red blood. For a moment, the smell of blood filled the air in the forest. It was as if another big battle had been fought. After dealing with them, the commander of the Li army, Diwu Jing, suddenly turned his head and looked behind him. At this moment, the armor on his body had cracked open. His hair was a mess. His mouth and nose were full of blood. There was a slanted knife wound on his neck, curling up the flesh. A personal guard beside him saw this and hurried over to help him take off his armor and treat the wound. Diwu Jing pushed him aside and reached out to tear off the broken armor. Then he strode through the wounded soldiers and pulled out a knife stuck diagonally on the ground. He came to the front of the Qing army. His appearance and aura were indeed terrifying. Blood was still flowing from the wound on his neck, soaking through half of his body. His face was also black and red like a demon. The shields in front of the Qing army had yet to be removed. Diwu Jing's face was dark. Without a word, he extended his foot and kicked. His huge physique was strong to begin with and his kick was skillful as well. As a result, he was able to kick away the 2 shields with just 1 kick. Then it was as if he saw the Qing army as nothing. He pushed left and right as if he was in his own army. He opened up a path for himself and walked in front of Ding Min. The Qing soldiers already felt slightly apologetic for coming late. Seeing that Diwu Jing was seriously injured again, they thought that he had barged in so angrily to reason with their team leader. Facing a seriously injured soldier who had just won a battle, they couldn't really capture him. There were still twice as many Li Jun soldiers over there. However, Diwu Jing was not here to reason. Ding Min frowned slightly. "Fifth General." With only these 4 words, Fifth Jing raised his saber and chopped down. Although he was injured, this saber strike was powerful and heavy, actually producing a sound of breaking air. Who would have thought that Diwu Jing would run into the Qing army to kill people? They were all stunned for a moment. Ding Min was stunned as well. Yan Er, on the other hand, was smart enough to block the attack with his longbow. But it was only slightly off the mark. It was originally aimed at the face, but now it was aimed at the shoulder. However, Ding Min had already come back to her senses. She crossed her arms and used the armor on her arms to block the attack. With a clanging sound, Ding Min and her horse were forced back 3 steps. The armor on her arm was cut into 3 pieces and half of her body was numb. Now they knew that Diwu Jing was really going to kill someone. The officers and soldiers on both sides immediately swarmed him. Some grabbed his waist, some grabbed his arms, some grabbed his legs, and they pressed him to the ground. They didn't dare to kill him. They were afraid that they would strangle the heavily injured Li commander to death. On this side, the Qing army had moved. On the other side, the Li army was also in a mess. Holding weapons in their hands, they surrounded the Qing army and chaotically shouted things like, "The southern barbarians ran away at the last minute and still want to harm our governor." The Qing army had nothing to shout back at. They could only form a formation and face them silently with ashen faces. Inside the formation, since Diwu Jing was pressed to the ground, Ding Min jumped off her horse and called for the Qing army to pull Diwu Jing up. After such a torment, the Li commander finally had no strength. But his gaze was still fierce. He only looked at Ding Min as if the one being captured was not him. "Watch the battle, Do you southern barbarians know how the Li dynasty deals with deserters and those who are afraid to fight?" "We are not Li people," Ding Min said calmly. At the same time, she accepted the sackcloth Su Mao handed over. As she stared at Diwu Jing, she slowly wrapped the wound on her arm. "Furthermore, we are not watching the battle, nor are we afraid to fight. General Diwu is skilled in the art of war and strategy. Think about it." As he slowly spoke, he glanced at the hillside not far away amidst the flashes of knives and swords around him. Li Yunqing was looking at the scenery. "We were attacked on the road. In reality, we were ambushed. Since the other side came prepared and could set up an ambush in front, it is hard to guarantee that they wouldn't set up an ambush in the back. Although we are 2 armies, we are fighting together for the righteous path of the world against demons. How could we sit back and do nothing?" Ding Min said in a low voice, "Earlier we were only holding the formation to prevent being attacked from the front and back and being attacked from the front and back. Later we saw that the enemy was not doing so, so we also pressed forward. General Diwu is a clear-eyed person. There is no way you couldn't see it clearly." Diwu Jing smiled coldly. "Holding the formation? I think you want to run away. Let me ask you." "There's no need to ask." His words were interrupted. Kong Tongzi held his sword in his hand and leaned on the ground as he walked into the middle of the chaotic soldiers. The Li army and the Qing army were facing off earlier. Their knives and spears were unsheathed. It seemed that with just one look they would start fighting. Now that Kong Tongzi had walked over, no one dared to point their swords at him. They all lowered their weapons. He cut a sorry figure and walked majestically until he was between Diwu Jing and Ding Min. He looked at the 2 of them. Then he said to Diwu Jing, "Don't you see what that painter Hun Yuanzi is doing? It is rare for these people to have such courage." He huffed and turned his head to look at Li Yunqing. His gaze was complicated. Logically speaking, it was true that the Qing army had delayed the battle. It was also true that the painter Hun Yuanzi was afraid to advance. However, he looked at Li Yunqing's expression and behavior. If he had indeed ordered the Qing army not to fight and was going to watch them die, then now that he saw them safe and sound, where did he find the courage to be so calm? Furthermore, just now he knew he was going to die. He saw General Honghua's gaze at that moment. He also knew that his strike did not have such great power. Yet that demon was heavily injured. He knew that it was not his own power. There was a master in the dark. Afterward, Kong Tongzi laughed involuntarily in his heart, laughing at himself. He had truly been scared by that demon. For a moment he even wondered if this primordial chaos master was that expert. Because of this thought he looked at Ding Min again. I want to ask you. Answer me honestly. Just now what was Han Yuanzi doing? Ding Min froze slightly. Then he furrowed his brows slightly. Priest Han Yuanzi. Just now he was following us to cover our retreat. Kong Tongzi saw Ding Min's expression when he said these words. He also saw the expressions of the Qing soldiers beside him. Thus he knew that he seemed to be speaking against his heart. Thus he temporarily relaxed on Han Yuanzi's side. It wasn't him. He was just a painter who was afraid of death and didn't want others to charge and kill him. Chapter 387. But if it wasn't Han Yuanzi, who else could it be? Kong Tongzi frowned between the Li army and the Qing army. He frowned for a dozen breaths. Then he suddenly made a sword sign in his hand and slowly rose into the air. His method was considered a small trick among cultivators. But in the eyes of these mortals, it was a real power that surpassed their understanding. For a moment these soldiers held their breath and stared at him. They almost forgot about the dispute earlier. A swordsman who had just defeated a strong enemy showed such skill. Who wouldn't be convinced? But when Kong Tongzi was in the air he suddenly stopped and bowed. He said in a clear voice, "Thank you, my friend." Then he bowed 3 times respectfully. At this time even the slowest soldier knew that someone had helped him just now. In fact, Kong Tongzi was not surprised. There were many people in the same way in the mountains. It was rare to see them. But if they met a passing master they helped him and then left with the wind. It was not something to be surprised about. But that little painter Han Yuanzi was really hateful. He paid his respects to the expert in the air and flew straight to Li Yunxin's side. Only cultivators of the transcendent state could fly in the air. Kong Tongzi was a transcendent cultivator. Although the sky dance technique had yet to reach maturity and could not fly too far, it was enough to show off its abilities in front of a mere painter. His face was dark like water. He only stared at Li Yunxin. Seeing this, the Qing army and the Li army knew that Kong Tongzi was going to attack Li Yunxin. Some people wanted to come closer to watch the show, but Kong Tongzi shouted sternly, "Wait." He usually traveled with the Li army and did not have a good temper. But most of the time his face was dark. It was rare for him to show anger like this. Because of this shout no one dared to come closer. Since the confrontation between the Li army and the Qing army had been resolved by Kong Tongzi, Su Mao moved to Ding Min's side. So, just now, someone helped him? Then he frowned. Who? They were just mortals without much knowledge. Of course they did not know who it was. However, the person he was asking was none other than Primordial Chaos C. Kong Tongzi, the sword cultivator, was not in the mood to listen to them talk about how this Daoist Han Yuanzi killed the old fox last night. Kong Tongzi also did not see this Taoist priest Han Yuanzi's demeanor on the hillside, nor did he hear his tone of voice. But in Ding Min and Su Mao's eyes, his confidence and nonchalance. It should be built on strong confidence and ability. So could it be, but Ding Min only glanced at Su Mao and did not say anything. He turned his head and saw that on the distant slope, Kong Tongzi was staring at Li Yunxin for a while. However, Li Yunxin didn't show any fear on his face. He just frowned and asked, "What's the matter?" Kong Tongzi suddenly sneered and clasped his hands behind his back saying, "The heavens are merciful. I'm just telling you that you don't have long to live." Li Yunxin was still frowning. "Many people have said this to me in the past and I'm still alive and well. What are you trying to say?" Kong Tongzi shook his head. "There's no need to argue with I. I'm not in the mood to intimidate you. It's just because you met me and had a fate with me, you can't make the decision on this matter. If you want to blame something you can only blame yourself for being born unlucky. The reason why I'm telling you this now is not because I really see you as an opponent or an enemy. You don't have that qualification. It's just that the heavens are merciful. After slaughtering the meat on the cloud mountain, we still have to recite a scripture about reincarnation. For you it's just a routine rule. This is also a rule that I set for myself." Kong Tongzi smiled. "When I saw you before I didn't like you. Because you were born beautiful. But this dislike isn't enough to make me kill you. That's also troublesome. However, I was injured in the battle with the demon just now. And because I experienced the great terror of life and death, I might have entered a tribulation." Kong Tongzi paused. I don't know what tribulation it is. But once I think of your face or think of how you cowered to survive just now, my thoughts are very unclear. This is the critical period of entering a tribulation, so I can't let it go. When Kong Tongzi said these words, Li Yunxin's expression was still calm. But the swordsman could see that this primordial chaos the painter was actually trying to suppress some emotions in his heart, to prevent them from showing on his face. It should be fear. So he looked at Li Yunxin and said another sentence, what a coincidence. I haven't passed the killing tribulation yet. But this primordial chaos, at least on his face, still didn't show any reaction. Kong Tongzi realized one thing and then looked at Li Yunxin and suddenly laughed. This painter probably didn't know what the killing tribulation was, right? Just at this moment he suddenly felt a little dull. It was like a man saying a lot of proclamations to an ant, but how could the ant understand what the man said? So he sighed and looked up at Li Yunxin. I should have killed you on the spot. But just now a master passed by. Maybe he didn't want to see blood, so I spared your life for now. He carefully looked at Li Yunxin's expression. When we get out of this Manwan mountain, I'll make my thoughts clearer. Li Yunxin blinked. It was already afternoon. The setting sun shone on his smooth face, and his long eyelashes cast a shadow under his eyes. His pupils also turned pale gold because of the sunlight, like a piece of clear amber. This made Kong Tongzi frown even more. Such a good appearance. Humph. Then the owner of this appearance, Primordial Chaos the painter, said, So you came to me just because you feel more and more unhappy, so you want to kill me? Li Yunxin opened his eyes wide. Just because I'm prettier than you want to kill me? And you want to tell me first, so that you can enjoy my face when I know I'm going to die but can't escape? You cultivators. Li Yunxin frowned sadly. Why are you all so perverted? Kong Tongzi only smiled and didn't say anything more to this painter. He turned and walked away. He had seen many people in the secular world and knew that not everyone would have the same reaction when faced with the same thing. When faced with life and death, everyone would be afraid, but some people would tremble and cry for mercy, and some people would sing loudly to meet death. Maybe at the end their courage would disappear. However, there were people who stubbornly held on and refused to show fear even in death. Perhaps this painter belonged to this category, but Kong Tongzi didn't want to tangle with him any longer. This painter could suppress it all he wanted. But he knew how afraid he would be. Because of this, Kong Tongzi felt his thoughts become slightly clearer. Could be seen that this painter deserved to die. Then this sword cultivator told Diwu Jing to prepare the troops, bury the bodies and bandage the wounds. He didn't mention the painter and the Qing army again. That General Red Flame hadn't died. Kong Tongzi sat upright on the horse, thinking as he watched the Li army and the Qing army prepare. Earlier he had killed many small demons in the mountain, and now he had finally drawn out this big demon. Since the big demon had been wounded and fled, it might draw out something even more terrifying. General Red Flame's master should be that Yujun. Kong Tongzi recalled the two banners he saw behind the banshee earlier. One of them said Yujun's ladies was arrow, and the other said General Red Flame's arrow. Arrow and arrow combined, it was undoubtedly a pheasant. That General Red Flame's true body was a pheasant. Then, was she the wife of that real demon Yujun? Then things were really troublesome. Demons were cruel and cunning, but it was said that those big demons who had matured would occasionally have emotions like humans. His wife had been wounded by him, and once Yujun left the nest. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt a wave of annoyance. He felt that the meridians that had been wounded in the previous battle were also blocked. So he shouted in a low voice, "Let's go. Don't rest tonight. Let's get out of Manwan Mountain first." The Li army and the Qing army had experienced the fierce battle earlier and knew that the mountain was now a dangerous place. Thus, they had no objections to Kong Tongzi's orders. The Li army was still in front and the Qing army was behind. They followed the mountain path in a long line. The only difference was that there was a small group of Li soldiers at the very back. Kong Tongzi was also in that group. He had to watch the painter Hun Yuanzi. In reality, he had to kill him. If he had some other use, such as if that big demon actually came and throwing him out could buy them some time to escape, then the painter would have died a worthy death. They traveled like this for an hour. Ding Min rode her horse beside Li Yunxin for an hour. When they first met, this old man was very arrogant and looked difficult to get along with. Later, intentionally or not, he began to cheer everyone up in the camp and they slowly got along. But just now they charged forward with the will to die. They didn't think they would all come back alive. Thus he said many rude things to Li Yunxin that he normally wouldn't say. Now that they were together again, Ding Min didn't know what to say. He watched as the painter Han Yuanzi rode his horse with the group under the setting sun. The expression on his face was calm as if he didn't care at all about what had just happened. But Ding Min felt that this old man just didn't show his thoughts on his face. He felt that he could also see that this old man was thinking about some things. The so-called calmness was just an expression of suppressed emotions. In reality, his heart was in turmoil. What did Daoist Kong Tongzi say to him? Did he scold him or? The sun slowly moved west accompanied by the sound of footsteps, armor clashing and wind in the forest. The horizon darkened slightly and the forest grew even colder. When he exhaled, his mouth and nose were filled with white mist. Ding Min's legs had gotten sick when he was guarding the border. Once he was cold, he was not very nimble. Thus he pulled out a cotton robe from the back of the saddle. He wanted to put it on himself, but he suddenly thought of something. He looked at Li Yunxin. Old Daoist, it's getting cold. Do you want to? As he spoke, he handed the cotton robe over. There was a distance of a horse between the two. When Li Yunxin heard his words, he turned his head and looked at it but didn't take it. Ha! He snorted coldly, still so filial. After saying this, he frowned. Will I wear this thing? Hearing this, Ding Min was slightly stunned and then he sighed in his heart. He wasn't despicable, he was still happy when he was scolded and despised. But this old man's tone was no different from before. It seemed to mean that at least here, he didn't mind anymore. He was just being polite. Now he smiled, retracted his hand and put on the robe himself. Then he looked at Li Yunxin. Old Daoist, what did that Taoist priest say just now? I didn't mean anything else. I just wanted to ask if... him. Li Yunxin wasn't as unhappy as Ding Min was worried. On the contrary, the previous unhappy expression on his face disappeared in an instant, replaced by a smile. He said he wanted to kill me. As he spoke, he winked at Ding Min as if this was a very funny matter. And this very funny matter had been bottled up in his heart for a long time. Now he could finally share it. Ding Min was slightly stunned. The surrounding Qing soldiers who could hear them also glanced in their direction. Then Ding Min furrowed his brows and lowered his voice. Is the Taoist priest joking? That crazy person just ran in front of me and said with a straight face that he thought I was too beautiful and that he was too ugly. So when he saw me, he felt that his thoughts weren't smooth, so he wanted to kill me to vent his anger. Taoist priest Han Yuanzi didn't seem to mind that the Qing soldiers had heard his words. Did you know? Originally, walking around the mountains with you was very boring. But when it came to this matter, I've already laughed for a full 2 hours and can still laugh for an entire day. These Daotong and Kenzo perverts are simply too cute. After Li Yunxin said these words, he seemed to want to laugh out loud but forcefully suppressed it. Ding Min and Su Mao met each other's eyes. The Qing soldiers around them also looked at each other and didn't say anything. They also didn't look at Taoist priest Han Yuanzi anymore. Then Ding Min lowered his voice again. That Taoist Kong Tongzi is also a member of the Xianmen. Why is his murderous intent so heavy? Taoist master, did you hear wrong? Li Yunxin huffed and ignored him. Ding Min thought for a bit and turned her head to glance behind her. Tian was slowly darkening. Thus, the small group of Li soldiers behind the Qing army couldn't be seen clearly in the darkness. He couldn't see where Taoist Kong Tongzi was. He turned his head and lowered his voice even more. Taoist master, you might as well give in. You can't use something like your life in a fit of pique. Li Yunxin smiled coldly and shook his head. Waving his hand, he said, Go on your way. In a bit there will be more things for you to worry about. He then turned his horse's head and rushed ahead of him. Su Mao had been on his other side the entire time and silently listened to the two of them speak. Looking at Ding Min again, he shook his head slightly. Our Taoist master's personality. Even if he were to be beheaded with a smile, he wouldn't beg for mercy. He's the same as Yen. Ding Min looked worriedly at Li Yunxin's back and furrowed her brows. You won't actually kill someone, right? However, Su Mao only thought for a bit and said something else. Did you hear that? This Taoist master just said that he had things to worry about in a bit. Boss, before General Honghua came, what did he say? Ding Min paused upon hearing these words. Then she felt the hairs on her back all stand up. Chapter 388. Before the Red Flame General attacked the Li army, their Taoist master Hunyuanzi said, "If you don't want to die, don't go." The facts proved that he was right. The few people in front of the Li army except for Diwu Jing were all dead. If they had run to the front at that time, there would only be about 30 people left. Just now he said something else. At that time, Ding Min was worried about the fate of this Taoist master, so he didn't take it to heart. Now, after hearing Su Mao's question again, he realized that Li Yunxin's words seemed to have some other meaning. Could it be? When she thought of this, the chill on Ding Min's body intensified. Almost immediately he turned his head and looked around, trying to find some clues. But there was a dense forest all around. In autumn the sun set quickly. A quarter of an hour ago there was still some afterglow in the sky, but a quarter of an hour later, the sun had already disappeared. The coldness and the darkness of the night came together and surrounded everyone. Ding Min looked around, but she couldn't find any clues. He felt that danger was hiding in every corner. So he looked at Su Mao again, and with a little force he urged the horse to catch up with Li Yunxin. He approached him, frowned and whispered, "Taoist master, what did you mean? Did I see anything?" Li Yunxin only shrugged. "I didn't see anything." Ding Min was about to relax when he heard this, but Li Yunxin said again, "But I smelled something. It was fishy and smelly." "Can't you smell it?" Ding Min was stunned. He sniffed hard. The autumn night was cold, and after sniffing for a while he coughed. But he only smelled grass, wood and weapons. There was no fishy or smelly smell. So he said, "Taoist master, I didn't." "Of course you can't smell it." Li Yunxin yawned as if this matter was very boring. About a dozen miles away from here, there was another group of cultivated monsters that had taken human form. "Even Kong Tongzi probably can't smell it. But I'm a mystic enlightened cultivator. So..." He squinted at Ding Min. "Tell your men to be careful." Ding Min felt that he hadn't been in a daze for as long as a day in his entire life. He was in a daze again, so the horse slowed down and fell behind Li Yunxin. Su Mao caught up with him and frowned. "Boss, what do you mean?" Ding Min frowned as well. "Our Taoist master said he heard it. He smelled the stench of some kind of monster more than 10 miles away. Do you think he's joking or?" Su Mao blinked his eyes for a while. "This Taoist master of ours sure is unrestrained. He spoke as he pleased. But a dozen li away? It seems like, Chief, do you think he's going to do something?" And, as he spoke, he raised his hand, using his index and middle fingers as the legs of a little man, and walked a few steps on his arm guard. Ding Min frowned. "You mean he's trying to escape?" "Our Taoist master looks like a loose person who doesn't like to be restrained, but he's also very strong." Su Mao looked to his left and right, making sure that Li Jun, who was further behind, couldn't hear them. "He definitely won't bow down to that Taoist master Kong Tongzi. But we don't know the rules between cultivators. What if these things really involve life and death? No matter what kind of person he is, life is always important. Maybe." Ding Min clenched his fist and hit the saddle. "Is he trying to create a mess and take the opportunity to escape? That's why he told us to be careful." Su Mao thought for a while. "If a monster really came, as you heard from Taoist master Kong Tongzi, it'll be a more terrible big monster. How could he say it so easily?" "That's true." Ding Min nodded. After thinking for a while, he said, "But tell our men to get ready first. If there's a mess, if he really wants to leave, we'll pretend that we didn't see it." These two soldiers of the secular world used their thoughts, within the scope of their understanding, to restore the truth of the entire matter. This was a layer that Li Yunxin hadn't expected. He had heard their conversation clearly. Thus, when he heard them instruct the Qing soldiers to not act rashly if anything happens, he sighed slightly in his heart. These people, when he was a person in his previous life, because of his own reasons, he didn't feel that there was anything special about the world. The entire world was just an environment for him to live in. It was difficult for him to truly integrate into it. Because of this, in this life, whether it was when he abandoned his human body or when he became a demon, there was no conflict or reluctance in his heart. But this life was not the same as before. He slowly began to understand the coldness of human emotions. Although this process was slow, it was continuous. After experiencing the various things in the world of demons and cultivators, he suddenly fell back into the dust and saw the thoughts in the hearts of these weak and powerless secular mortals. When he saw the perhaps stupid but interesting thoughts that rarely existed in the world of demons and cultivators, he finally felt the mortal world that he had no interest in and had even abandoned like a pair of worn-out shoes was actually interesting. He smiled in his heart. Once again he felt that entering calamity was also interesting. And so the sky finally turned completely dark. Tonight was the last quarter moon and the moonlight was very dim. The mountain path was already difficult to walk and it was even more difficult now. But he didn't dare light a torch. The light of the torch could be seen from several li away. It was practically an announcement to all the demons in the mountain that he was here. So he used a talisman. A small talisman lit up in a special glass lamp and produced a milky white halo of light. This halo of light was blocked by 5 wooden walls. Only one side was glass. Thus the light shot forward. It could illuminate the path and was not too conspicuous. Regardless of whether it was for the Li army or the Qing army, this was a rare thing. Many soldiers knew of its existence and had heard old people mention it and use it before. But now that he had actually seen it, he still felt surprised. But he also knew that this kind of thing was only used when the situation was urgent. Although a cultivator with a state of mind could casually write such a talisman, there were tens of thousands of soldiers in the kingdom of Qing. If each group was equipped with a dozen talismans, it would be a terrifying number. How could there be so many cultivators who did not refine their souls and bodies to do this kind of thing for the mortals of the secular world? Thus the novelty quickly passed. Everyone knew that they were truly taking a risk. They only wanted to get out of the mountain as soon as possible. After another hour, they could finally see the endless plains at the foot of the mountain in the distance. Those with good eyesight could even see the dots of lights on the plains. Although it was sparse, it meant that there were signs of human activity. That light was not from a normal village. It was from the Allied army that had crossed the mountains and slowly set up camp there. It seemed that they could finally relax a little. In the darkness, lights could always bring people hope and a sense of security. Most of the time, when a Li soldier walking at the very front of this army stepped onto a small hill and pushed aside a clump of dead branches in front of him, he saw an even brighter light. Chapter 389. But it was not the light but the gaze. People said that the gaze was like a torch, and now it was vividly interpreted. There were more than 10 huge beasts. Each of them was as big as a house, and against the dark forest, they were like a series of small mountains blocking the road. The beasts looked like fierce tigers, but their upper and lower lips were like wild boars with fangs protruding out. They had dark golden fur and their fur was covered with black spots and stripes. However, these terrifying beasts were not looking at the soldiers who had left the army. When the soldier in the lead pushed aside the dead bushes, he saw a dozen or so beasts facing him. Their lantern-like eyes shone with white light, and they were staring at a huge flat rock on the opposite side of the path. It was a big rock facing the cliff, and beside the rock was an old weird pine tree. The pine tree had turned dark green in autumn, but its needles were still standing upright. This place was already close to the edge of the rolling mountains. Almost everywhere were towering cliffs, and only a few places could allow people and horses to slowly walk down. But they also had to be very careful, or else they would fall into the abyss and die a horrible death if they were not careful. And on the rock there were 2 people. One of them was a middle-aged man wearing an apricot yellow robe. Perhaps it was a Daoist robe, because the style of his clothes was not the style that people wore nowadays. There were 5 strands of long beard on his face, and his appearance was handsome, but his face was slightly dark as if he had some unlucky disease. The other person opposite him was also a man. But his appearance was more majestic and the beard on his cheeks was unusually lush and thick. On his head was a golden crown, but he wore a black robe. The black robe was decorated with golden threads and looked very gorgeous. These 2 people sat opposite each other with a stone chessboard placed between them. They were actually playing chess. On this kind of night in this kind of place, they were being stared at by more than 10 fierce beasts. And those fierce beasts were not only fierce beasts. In the shadows behind them there were also many figures. Seeing all this, Li Bing was stunned for a moment and did not have time to scream. When he came back to his senses and was about to shout, his comrade beside him covered his mouth and pulled him back. Previously they had only encountered General Crimson Flame and lost many of their brothers. Now that they saw so many monsters and demons blocking their way, they suddenly felt that there was no chance of survival. But then he heard a low voice coming from behind. Out of the way, out of the way. It was Kong Tongzi who had come to the front. The Li army at the front hurriedly retreated, but they also felt a little more at ease. They didn't know anything about Taoist magic and they didn't know anything about demons and devils, but this Taoist priest Kong Tongzi had been slaying demons and devils along the way. Maybe with his presence there would be a chance to turn things around. Kong Tongzi walked to the front of the withered branch, held his breath and looked ahead. Then his heart sank. The mortal soldier's eyesight was not as good as his, so they could not see clearly. But he could clearly see that General Red Flame was among the crowd behind the dozen or so ferocious beasts. And it wasn't a crowd but a group of demons and devils. Every one of them had the appearance of a human, and their eyes and movements were quite clever. Obviously they were not those stupid low-level demons, but all of them were demons and devils. Each of them had the same cultivation level as those he had killed before. So many demons and devils were gathered here. Kong Tongzi sucked in a breath of cold air. Could it really be that Yujun came? But that was a great demon king of the true realm. Why would he really come here to make things difficult for him? Halfway through this breath of cold air, a few thoughts flashed through his mind. Actually, it wasn't that he didn't have the thought of abandoning this group of soldiers and running away by himself. But this time he didn't follow the army to walk in the secular world, but to carry out a mission from the celestial sect. The war was imminent and these low-level cultivators also had to do their part. If he ran away by himself and the sect found out about this, it would not be a good thing. The sect naturally didn't care about these mortals. But that sect leader Jingguangzi hated people who didn't listen to her orders the most. In front of a true realm cultivator he didn't dare to play any tricks. But at this moment Kong Tongzi really had the thought of retreating. In front of these demons and devils, there was only one thing waiting for him: death. Between the imminent threat of death and the possible punishment that would come a long time later, any smart person would know which one to choose. Therefore he gritted his teeth, prepared to gently put down the withered branch in his hand, and took 3 or 4 steps back to appease these soldiers. Then he would escape under the cover of the night. But just as this thought came into his mind he heard someone speak among the demons. And that sentence made him frown slightly, temporarily suppressing this thought in his mind. The one who spoke was General Honghua. This female demon had already wrapped up the wound on her head and seemed to be fine. She jumped up from the group of demons and landed on the huge head of a wild beast and shouted at the 2 people. "You 2 are very bold. How dare you block King Yujun's way? Where did you leaders come from?" It turned out that the 2 people on the rock were not with them. But the 2 men who were playing against each other didn't answer her immediately. Instead they played 2 moves in silence. After General Honghua shouted that sentence she didn't rush them, but just stared at them angrily. And the demons behind her also didn't make a sound, looking as if they were extremely afraid of these 2 people. When the black-robed and bearded handsome man put down another piece, he raised his head and looked at General Honghua. "King Yu? Humph. Where did this little demon come from? How dare you show off here?" He sneered and said, "Block King Yujun's way? Hey, let me ask you, you demons, are you looking for trouble with a group of soldiers who left the army?" General Honghua was slightly startled. Not because they knew about this, but because, although she couldn't see through the cultivation of these 2 people, she knew that they were far above her. Maybe they were 2 true realm cultivators. 2 true realm cultivators, caring about the life and death of more than 100 mortals? She frowned. "So what if we are? Are you going to stand up for those mortals?" The bearded man suddenly raised his eyebrows and laughed. "So what if we are?" Humph. He stood up. His body was extremely tall, almost 2 heads taller than ordinary people. "Do you think the people of the Li Kingdom can be touched by you bastards?" "No. Which blind bastard killed the people of the Li Kingdom? Obediently come to me and accept your death." His words were not only heard by the demons, but also by Kong Tongzi and the Li Kingdom soldiers behind him. They were all startled. Kong Tongzi hurriedly narrowed his eyes and looked at the bearded man again. He originally thought that it was just an internal conflict between the demons. But now that he said these words he was actually full of righteousness and wanted to protect them, not at all like an evil demon. He looked at the handsome middle-aged man in front of the bearded man again. Although he didn't look good, he looked like a dragon and a phoenix, and didn't have the temperament of an ordinary demon. Could it be he had met a master who helped him? That master was these 2? They were actually protecting them all the way. Chapter 390. Kong Tongzi's heart skipped a beat and he let out a sigh of relief. If these two were really masters of Xianmen, what was there to be afraid of tonight? Although he didn't have much contact with big monsters, he knew that although they were cruel and violent, once they reached the real state, they also cherished their lives very much. If the two of them were true realm experts from the Profound Gate, Yujun would never understand why the great general of Red Flame was so stubborn and fought to the point where both sides suffered great losses. Now that he had calmed down a little, he decided to observe for a while, wait for the two masters to retreat, then he would go forward to pay his respects. He rarely saw high-level cultivators, even his own sect leader Jin Guangzi in the past 10 years, he had only seen him a few times. A word or a talisman from an expert could contain exquisite wisdom and truth. He really wanted to grasp this opportunity so that he could take a step forward on the path of cultivation. But at this moment General Red Flame suddenly let out a muffled snort. "Dai. How arrogant you are. I will kill a few more in front of you tonight, let's see what you can do." As soon as her voice fell, she raised her hand and made a grabbing motion. She was also at the transcendent state, so it wasn't easy for her to deal with Kong Tongzi. But it was a piece of cake for her to deal with the mortals around him. This time it seemed that she made a move with hatred in her heart, and a scream was heard. The two soldiers around Kong Tongzi were suddenly grabbed by her, and their bodies were broken into several pieces in midair. Their blood splashed all over the ground, right in front of the two men on the rock. She had already found them. At this moment, how could Kong Tongzi act like a coward in front of these two masters? Without thinking, he jumped out of the thicket with his sword and shouted, "What a witch! How dare you be so arrogant in front of the masters of Xianmen?" Kong Tongzi was facing more than a dozen fierce beasts and hundreds and thousands of enlightened monsters. But there was not even a trace of fear on his face. Instead, his clothes fluttered in the wind and he stood with his sword. Although his face was ugly, his temperament was heroic. But he was not stupid. After saying these bold words under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he rose and fell a few more times and landed on the side of the big green rock. He didn't dare to raise his eyes to look at the two experts on the rock, and only lowered his head slightly, hugging his sword and bowing. "I am a sword cultivator of the Kenzo 5-line sword sect, Kong Tongzi. I was ordered by my master to escort a group of soldiers to Mangwan Mountain to investigate the situation of the demons. A few days ago I encountered this demoness. Fortunately, the two of you helped me in secret. I hereby thank you." After saying these words, he did not dare to raise his head and only stared at the ground 3 inches in front of his feet. But strangely enough, when he jumped out, the demons didn't make any noise. He seemed to have been thrown into confusion by this sudden scene and didn't know what to do. For a moment, the wind and moon on the large green rock were silent. Only the blood from the Li army corpses that had been crushed in the air flowed along the lines of the green rock like a small stream. After a dozen breaths, Kong Tongzi also began to feel strange. He couldn't resist raising his head to look when he heard the sound of clothes rustling. It seemed that the curly-bearded Daoist who had stood up earlier had sat down again. He then heard the man say, "So, the one who protected these people along the way was you?" Hearing this voice, Kong Tongzi's earlier bit of hesitation completely disappeared. When the man spoke, there was a righteous aura in his voice. This was not something a normal demon could pretend to be. He had to be an accomplished master. Thus he gathered his thoughts and hurriedly said, "Yes. I was ordered by my master." The curly-bearded man did not seem to be interested in these things and quickly interrupted him. "So, the earth god was also killed by you?" Kong Tongzi paused and thought for a moment before realizing what the earth god was referring to. The Qing soldiers said that the painter accompanying them had killed some old fox and was calling himself the earth god. At the time he didn't think much of it. He only thought that if a painter could kill it, it had to be an unranked little demon. Earlier, when General Honghua had blocked the way, she had specifically mentioned, whoever killed her personally granted the land. Now this curly-bearded Taoist had mentioned it again. It seemed that he had also heard it from General Honghua. That old fox, what kind of god was he? At this moment, Kong Tongzi slightly regretted that he hadn't investigated in more detail. Just as he was hesitating, he heard the general of Red Flame yell, That old thing is a good for nothing, but according to people, he is the father-in-law of our king. Are you going to meddle in this matter? Hearing these words, Kong Tongzi already had a plan in his heart. It looked like that old fox was quite a character. Then wasn't that a meritorious service? He immediately raised his hands again and lowered his head. In a low voice he said, Daoist, that old fox was killed by I. He then turned his head slightly to look at General Honghua and laughed coldly. Everyone has the right to punish evil and unorthodox sections. Let alone a mere fox demon. Do you dare to be presumptuous in front of these two Taoist priests? General Honghua glared at him and shouted in a delicate voice, You? I've already fought with you just now. How could your means be able to deal with his wind of primordial chaos? While saying this, she rolled her eyes and grabbed something next to her. Someone else did it, right? The withered tree that had been blocking Li Jun's path was immediately torn into pieces, revealing the hundreds of people behind it. The female monster's eyes wandered back and forth among these people for a while. Suddenly she fixed her eyes on Li Yunxin. She stared at him for a while. Li Yunxin was in the crowd at this time. His unique attire was very eye-catching. The expression on his face was even more eye-catching. His face was calm and carefree, as if he was extremely bored. It was as if the terrible situation here did not affect him at all, and it was all just a joke. General Honghua looked at him and pointed at him. Was it you? He didn't seem to be taken seriously by the female monster. This made Kong Tongzi's face heat up. He frowned and said in a deep voice, He is just a painter. I am a cultivator of Kenzo's 5-line sword sect. How can an ignorant demon like you guess my means? The bearded Taoist sighed. He seemed to feel that the two of them arguing was very boring. Kong Tongzi immediately stopped talking and waited for the expert to make a decision. The bearded Taoist sighed and said, In short, it was either him or him, right? This sounded like he was talking to General Honghua. Then he raised his hand and waved. Then you can take these two people away. They are not children of my Li kingdom. But if you take these two away and tell me about that land of yours, I'll settle the score with you for killing my people. Kong Tongzi was stunned. Because of the words of the bearded Taoist. People of the Li kingdom? Hand me and the painter over to the demon. What does he mean? He subconsciously raised his head. Before, he was afraid of the majesty of these two experts. When he came close, he bowed his head and didn't dare to look at them directly. Because it was night and the light was not good, he didn't see what the bearded Taoist robe looked like. But now he raised his head in surprise and finally saw it clearly. That was not a Taoist robe. The black robe of this bearded Taoist was embroidered with golden thread. It was the totem of the 5 fierce beasts and 5 birds. This was the totem of the Li kingdom's royal family. Before he could come to a conclusion in his mind, he suddenly heard Diwu Jing's voice behind him. Diwu Jing was a man like an iron tower. Usually his voice was calm and a little hoarse. But now his voice was sharp and thin, as if an invisible hand was strangling him. This Dutu commander of the Li kingdom's howling army ran a few steps forward on the path. He didn't care about those terrible beasts at all. He ran until he reached the big green rock. Then he knelt down. His eyes were straight and his lips were trembling. Your Majesty? Your Majesty. I, Dutu commander of the howling army, Diwu Jing, kowtow to your Majesty. A chill suddenly climbed up Kong Tongzi's body. Came from his tailbone and went up his spine to the top of his head in an instant. He widened his eyes and stared at the bearded Taoist. He couldn't say a word. He also heard Diwu Jing kowtow 3 times and 9 times under the big green rock. He also heard him say things like, I had the honor to see your Majesty in the 32nd year of the Upper Yuan dynasty. Come and kowtow to your Majesty. Your Majesty is wise and mighty. I knew your Majesty wouldn't die like this. And so on. After a dozen breaths, Kong Tongzi's legs went soft and he fell to the ground. His teeth chattered. You are Emperor Li? That is, Emperor Li of the mysterious realm. Chapter 391. This Kenzo cultivator fell into a terrible and desperate situation. No wonder the words of this curly-bearded Taoist were so mighty. He was the ghost emperor whose soul was not taken away after his death. He had gathered the power of wishes of millions of people in the Li Kingdom to reach the mysterious realm, and was close to the Grand Supreme, Emperor Li. He had the aura of an emperor. Such a terrible big demon. No, it could not be described as a big demon anymore. Which big demon in the world could kill 3 mysterious realm and 2 real realm cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo as soon as they achieved the Tao? And he actually sent himself in front of such a terrifying fiendish demon. But whether he was afraid or surprised, this Emperor Li didn't seem to care. This ghost emperor didn't look at him. Instead he looked at Diwu Jing, who was under the green stone. 80 or 90 Li soldiers were already kneeling. Some were shouting, "Long live the emperor." Some dared not make a sound, and some only buried their faces on the ground, not daring to move. Many of them had heard that the dead emperor became a ghost cultivator. With such a big movement and the battle witnessed by so many people, even Daotong and Kenzo couldn't hide it. But now they really saw it. This kind of thing was beyond the endurance of many people. In such an era, the emperor was like a god in the hearts of mortals. And this one in front of them was an emperor who had the magical power of a god. This Emperor Li snorted softly and stood up again. He walked over Kong Tongzi, who was sitting on the ground with his hands behind his back, and walked to the big green stone. After I became a ghost cultivator, there are many things I can't remember. But there are many things I remember more clearly. He frowned slightly and looked at Diwu Jing, who was under the stone. "Raise your head." Diwu Jing immediately raised his head. His eyes were bright and looked straight into the eyes of the ghost emperor, which was a sharp contrast with Kong Tongzi. "I remember you." Emperor Li looked at him and nodded slightly. "In the 32nd year of the Upper Yuan dynasty, I was in a good mood, and it was the Lantern Festival. So I called the officer of the Shao Luo army who was in the capital to drink on the golden platform. You are Lu Tianji's bodyguard, right?" Diwu Jing was so excited that his face turned red. "Yes. At that time I was General Lu's bodyguard. What virtue or ability did I have that your majesty would remember me?" Emperor Li snorted. "I am no longer immortal. He became a ghost cultivator. Aren't you afraid to see me?" Diwu Jing immediately said loudly, "Your Majesty." "I still remember on the golden platform during the Lantern Festival, His Majesty said to General Lu, 'Your bodyguard looks mighty and looks like a talented general. That's why I'm here today. Your Majesty's kindness to me can't be repaid in this life, the next life and the next.'" Moreover, as he said this, a look of hatred appeared on his face. "Since His Majesty passed away, the court has been filled with traitors and the throne has been controlled by vile people. The great Li dynasty has... Hearing this, Emperor Li raised his eyebrows and said, "Ah, the throne is controlled by a villain? Which villain? Is it Prince Jin?" Diwu Jing said loudly, "Yes." Emperor Li suddenly laughed and said, "Ha! When I was on the throne, many people spoke ill of Prince Jin. But I felt that they were forming a clique to attack the crown prince. Lu Tianji was stripped of his military position and sent back to Tong province because he complained to King Jin. Until now. Humph. I was stupid at that time." Emperor Li squinted his eyes and said, "It was this Prince Jin who colluded with the Freemasonry and killed me." Diwu Jing turned pale with fright. Even the Li soldiers behind him, upon hearing this, temporarily forgot their fear and looked at each other in dismay. "Forget it." Emperor Li suddenly waved his sleeves and said, "After I died, I realized that there is another bigger world. Li Kingdom. What is the territory of mortals? This debt will be settled sooner or later. As for you, you are still my people. Go down the mountain. Leave the rest to this." Yujun, Diwu Jing did not speak, but Kong Tongzi suddenly shouted, "Ghost King, Ghost King. I didn't kill that old fox, it was that painter. Keep him. I am the messenger of the sword faction. You can't hand me over to that Yujun." After saying this, he sat on the ground and turned to Diwu Jing and shouted, "General Diwu, you can ask His Majesty for me. I've been slaying demons with you all along the way. But I've also saved your lives." Usually, Kong Tongzi held his head high and behaved like an otherworldly expert. But now he showed his ugly side and was even less courageous than a mortal. Diwu Jing frowned because of this. After hesitating for a while, he was about to speak, but he heard someone else speak. The one who spoke was the man in the yellow robe sitting opposite Emperor Li. This man had been staring at the chessboard and listening quietly. Now he coughed and said, "People of the Li Kingdom can go. But none of the Qing and I can go." After he said this, Emperor Li turned to him and said, "Brother, you still can't let it go?" The man in the yellow robe stood up and laughed. He looked at Emperor Li and said, "Let it go? You and I are both ghost cultivators. Since we are ghost cultivators, we have an obsession that turned into this Dharmakaya. If we really let it go, how can it still exist in the world?" He frowned and said, "The Qing and I destroyed my country and harmed my people. Humph, this debt will never be settled." People already knew that this Emperor Li was the Wu Emperor of the Li Kingdom who died a few months ago. And now, hearing this man talk about country and people, Kong Tongzi was stunned again. Who was this man? But after a few breaths of time, he once again widened his eyes. Although his cultivation was low, he was well informed. So he knew that the Langya cave of Daotong had gone to the river Wei of the Qing kingdom. It was said that in the city of Wei they fought with a terrible demon, the dragon Jiuqi, and lost many people. There was also a strange thing in the process. It was said that the soul of the previous dynasty of the Qing kingdom, the last emperor of the Yi kingdom, Emperor Yi Zhaowu Lv, had not been taken away by the black and white Yama kings after his death. At that time, the ghost emperor of the Yi kingdom and the dragon Jiuqi also stirred up trouble. Later they were defeated by the masters of the Langya cave. Could it be, you are the Zhaowu emperor of the Yi kingdom Lv? Kong Tongzi stared at him in disbelief. He also saw the pattern embroidered on his yellow robe. It was a dark golden tiger with 2 heads. It was indeed the emblem of the royal family of the Yi kingdom. Lv snorted and said, "You are quite knowledgeable." Kong Tongzi was stunned for a while and suddenly rushed up to hug his leg and said, Ghost King, since you want to take revenge on the people of the Qing kingdom, let me tell you. Among the people of the Qing kingdom, there is a painter with powerful magic. Yes, powerful magic. He was the one who killed the old fox. Ghost King, think about it. He is just a painter, but his cultivation has reached such a level. He must be from a noble family of the Qing kingdom royal family. He must have been fed with elixirs to be like this. Kong Tongzi said all this in one breath. He then raised his hand and pointed at the Qing army. It is that person. Chapter 392. The ghost emperor Lv listened to his words and looked in the direction he was pointing. With just one glance, he immediately furrowed his brows. Kong Tongzi looked at him fearfully, afraid to miss any trace of expression on his face. Because he did not want to die here today. He still had many things to do. Many things that other people and important people thought were unimportant, but to him were the most important things in his life to do. He had always done things cautiously. This time, coming to the mountains to kill demons was the most daring adventure he had taken since he started cultivating. He had originally thought that with his cultivation he would not run into a great demon. The Daotong Kenzo had so many true realm masters, and the great demons had to be on guard against them. He did not think that he would run into 3 of them. Now he could only rely on his brain. He knew that although the great demons were smarter than normal demons, they were, after all, birds and beasts. Their intelligence could not compare to that of a human. He also knew that although a ghost cultivator was once a human, since he became a ghost cultivator he had to have an obsession. He had to rely on his brain to mediate in this dangerous situation and fight for a way out for himself. Since the ghost emperor hated the people of the Qing kingdom, he would not be able to control himself when he saw the royal family of the Qing kingdom. First he would give him the hateful painter. Then he would observe carefully and temporarily pretend to be weak. He would look for an opportunity to provoke them to fight with the Yujun. It was not impossible to leave the mountains alive. Thinking of this and seeing the expression on the ghost emperor Lv face, Kong Tongzi felt a little better. It was fine as long as he frowned. He gathered his courage and said, Ghost Emperor, look carefully. That child humiliated I in every way possible because he was a noble in the secular world. I was a cultivator and did not care about him. In the end he went from bad to worse and tried to harm I when we met the General of Red Flame. This kind of behavior, whether it is a human, a ghost, or a demon, is despicable and vicious. As he said this, he saw Lv staring at the painter with his brows furrowed even tighter. He felt more at ease. Thus he stood up from the ground, gritted his teeth and turned to Emperor Li. Ghost King, I did not hesitate to risk my life to protect your people. Yet he and the Qing soldiers are watching from the sidelines from the back, watching as we go to our deaths. Do you think you can tolerate such a thing? Before Emperor Yi spoke, Emperor Li stared at Diwu Jing and said, I hate those vicious people who secretly do bad things. Diwu Jing, is what the Taoist said true? Diwu Jing hesitated for a while, not knowing if he should tell the truth or defend Kong Tongzi. Kong Tongzi had fought side by side with them before, so they were comrades after all. If someone else had asked him, he wouldn't have hesitated to say, what he said is true. But now it was Emperor Li who asked him. His reverence for the Ghost Emperor made him hesitant. At this moment a young man suddenly shouted, Bolsh *T. When did we sit back and do nothing? When did we want to harm you? The person who spoke was none other than the soft-skinned but hot-tempered Yan Er. The Qing soldiers saw the situation in front of them and heard these words. Even if they didn't know the inside story, they knew they were in a hopeless situation. Under these circumstances, as mortals, their lives were in the hands of demons. In other words, there was no way out. Since there was no way out, they wouldn't lose their courage like Kong Tongzi, who still had a glimmer of hope. Thus, when Yan Er heard these words, anger rose in his heart and evil grew in his heart. He was the first to jump out onto the hill next to the path. He wore a soft leather armor and held a longbow in his hand. As he cursed, he took out 3 arrows from the quiver on his waist, knocked them and shot. I'm going to die today anyway, so I'll send you on your way first, you shameless Taoist priest. As soon as he finished speaking, he used the method of shooting arrows in rapid succession. 3 arrows whooshed toward Kong Tongzi's face. The wind was strong, the sky was dark, and they were far away. But these 3 arrows were terrifyingly accurate. The first arrow was about to hit the bridge of his nose, but Kong Tongzi caught it with his hand. The second arrow hit the tail of the first arrow, but it didn't split it. Instead it nailed it forward a little. Yan Er's arrows were specially made and the tail was made of fine iron. Kong Tongzi was slightly stunned. He was a cultivator and this was the first time he saw a mortal with such exquisite skills. Could be called magical. While he was still in a daze, the third arrow had already arrived. It had hit the tail of the second arrow and nailed the arrow he was holding onto a little further forward. It was only a little bit, but the arrow had finally pierced through his skin. But Kong Tongzi was also a cultivator in the transcendent state, and his body was much stronger than a mortal's. The arrowhead left a small wound on his body and could not go any further. It only pierced out a drop of blood. However, this drop of blood had already shocked and enraged Kong Tongzi. A cultivator in the transcendent state was injured by a mortal. A wave of anger rose up in his chest. He exerted force in his palm and the arrow shaft immediately shattered into pieces. Then he widened his eyes and shouted, 2 ghost kings, let I help you take care of this mortal who doesn't know what's good for him. A fight between a transcendent state sword cultivator and a mortal was like a fight between ants in the eyes of the big demons. Who would care? Emperor Li didn't even look at him and only said to Emperor Yi, Brother, what are you thinking about? Is there anything special about that painter? Emperor Yi Xingyang frowned again. That person seems familiar. The person he was talking about was sitting on a short horse and looking at Emperor Li. Emperor Li? Other than the World 2 sages Shinryu and Golden Rock, he was the demon closest to the Taishang state. Li Yunxin really wanted to see something different about him, but he didn't know if it was because his cultivation was limited, or because Emperor Li's cultivation was too high, but he couldn't see anything different. Like Emperor Li, he didn't care about the fights between the mortals and low-level cultivators. But the others couldn't be as calm as him. Yan Er jumped up the hill and shot 3 arrows. Ding Min grabbed Li Yunxin's hand and didn't care about etiquette anymore. Daoist, who is that person? Ting and I? What is he talking about? This was the first time he disregarded etiquette and touched Li Yunxin's physical body, and he did it in a moment of desperation. But even so he felt something was wrong. This Daoist Hunyuanzi's hand was so cold. It was an autumn night and it was naturally cold. When the armor touched his neck it was so cold that he sucked in a breath. But this Daoist Hunyuanzi's hand was as cold as the armor. It was as if he didn't have any body temperature. He was the same temperature as the outside. Because of this, he was stunned and quickly let go of his hand. But Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and didn't care about his actions. It was as if what they were doing had nothing to do with him. Ding Min had seen this when they were saved by Old Fox for the first time. He also saw it when the Li army fought against General Honghua. At that time he always felt that there was a reason for it. The first time he saved them he acted like a master. Naturally he didn't care. The second time he watched the Li army fight against the demons he also said that he hated Kong Tongzi. But now, in front of such a powerful enemy in such a desperate situation he still acted like this. Ding Min was a smart person. So he suddenly realized that maybe he had been thinking about this Daoist Hunyuanzi wrongly. It wasn't that he was a master or hated Kong Tongzi. But he really didn't care. Everything he did didn't have a clear goal or desire like the secular people. He just did what he wanted to do and didn't do what he didn't want to do. Just like now he didn't want to escape and he wasn't in a hurry to escape. So he was as steady as a mountain. Ding Min froze for a moment then looked at Li Yunqing one last time. Then he turned his horse and walked away from him. He realized that this Daoist Hunyuanzi wouldn't save them or make plans for them just because he asked. It was just like when the young masters of the rich families in the capital met a pitiful beggar on the road. If they were in a good mood they would throw a piece of silver or even have someone take the beggar back into their manor. If this beggar thought he could beg that noble person for everything, then he was delusional. Ding Min jumped off his horse. Kong Tongzi had taken 3 arrows from Yen Air and was furious. This commander knew that they were on the edge of life and death and that the enemy was not someone they could fight against. Thus he pulled out the short knife at his waist and ruthlessly stabbed it into the butt of the warhorse he was riding. The warhorse whinnied in pain and charged forward into the Li army formation. On this narrow mountain path the Li army was a mess. Men and horses were thrown off their feet. Then Ding Min shouted, "Everyone run for your lives. Those who escape tell everyone what happened today." He was an old soldier who had seen life and death so he was very decisive. While many of the Qing soldiers were still watching and hoping for a fluke he knew there was no way to retreat. They had to take advantage of the chaos to split up and break out. Thus the Li army and Kong Tongzi were both slightly stunned. After this moment many of the Qing soldiers copied him and scared away the warhorses and the pack horses transporting the red earth. For a moment, although there were only a few dozen horses, the mountain path became even narrower. There was the power of tens of thousands of horses galloping. The dark night became a mess. Kong Tongzi's anger finally exploded. Seeing that the Ghost Emperor was not displeased, he raised his hand and raised his flying sword. "Run, where do you think you're going? First I'll take your painter's dog head and offer it to the Ghost King." Li Yunqing had used this method before and she liked it very much. First please the enemy so that they would let down their guard. Then she would slowly plot against them. Kong Tongzi used it with ease. In the chaos he stared at the eye-catching white-robed Hunyuanzi. Thinking that he was scared silly he stabbed forward with his sword. His flying sword had been damaged in the battle with General Honghua earlier. Although it was still green and hazy, its light flickered and did not move very quickly. Even so it was still much faster than the arrows of secular people. After he shouted this, the flying sword immediately arrived in front of Hunyuanzi's face. The killing intent he had been holding back for a long time was finally temporarily released. In that instant, Kong Tongzi felt his body was incomparably comfortable. Even his blood began to heat up in the cold autumn night. Then, his blood froze again. Li Yunqing raised his hand and caught his flying sword, just like how he had caught Yen Air's arrow earlier. He used 2 fingers. Chapter 393. A flying sword of a swordsman in the transcendent realm had been refined for decades with his life. Cutting through metal and stone was like cutting through water and air. At this moment it stopped in his fingers and could not move. The little sword buzzed and trembled for a while. It was Kong Tongzi's eyes widening in disbelief. After experiencing extreme shock he made one last effort to pull back the flying sword. Li Yunqing raised his eyebrows. He raised his other hand and flicked the flying sword. With a clear clang, the trembling flying sword immediately stopped moving like a dead fish. The light on its surface quickly dimmed and it quickly became a heavy, dead object. A mouthful of blood sprayed out of Kong Tongzi's mouth. He once again fell limply to the ground. But this time it wasn't because of fear. Instead it was because that casual strike just now had destroyed the spiritual energy on his flying sword. His cultivation was greatly damaged and his physical body was also heavily injured. He couldn't even stand steadily. He stared straight at Li Yunqing and said in a raspy voice, What happened? What happened to you? At this moment he finally realized that this Hunyuanzi was not a painter, but a person with a very high cultivation, at least far above his own. Earlier he had encountered the two ghost emperors and felt fear in his heart. He only wanted to feign civility and beg for a way out. Now that he knew that Li Yunxin was not a painter with a low cultivation, he felt a different kind of emotion. He had always hated it when people talked about his appearance. When he saw Li Yunxin, he saw that he was pretty and thought that he was just a body. But he was just a mortal. His cultivation would be the same as heaven and earth. How could he compare to him? Now his flying sword had been destroyed and his cultivation had been greatly damaged. Even continuing to cultivate might be an extravagant hope. Yet he found that not only was this Hunyuanzi beautiful, but his cultivation was above his own. The heavens were so unfair. He then thought of how he had mocked and ridiculed this person along the way and how the Li and Qing armies had all seen it. Now seeing this scene, didn't they all think of him as a laughingstock? That despicable person had probably been purposefully watching him make a fool of himself along the way. New hatred and old hatred welled up in his chest. His heart was filled with shame and indignation. He no longer cared about his life or his dignity. With one hand on the ground, he suddenly raised his other hand and pointed at Li Yunxin with a trembling finger. You actually humiliated I along the way. You. The Qing soldiers, who had fled in all directions with their frightened horses, also saw this scene. They were all as stunned as Kong Tongzi. They only knew that Hunyuanzi was a master, but they had never thought he would be this powerful. With one strike he had defeated the swordsman who they thought was powerful and powerful. Li Jun was also stunned. For a moment, more than 100 people were stunned on the mountain road. They only saw and heard Kong Tongzi continue. You have now destroyed my cultivation and let these useless things see what I am now. Have you finally resolved the hatred you have been holding all this way? You. In the past he had acted like a piece of trash in front of the two ghost emperors, but most of it was done on purpose to show weakness. Thus, even though he looked fearful, he was still able to speak with assurance. Now that he knew that his cultivation had almost been destroyed and that the person who had harmed him was such a person, he almost couldn't speak. He gritted his teeth and glared at Li Yunxin. He knew that he would be humiliated in a moment. That bastard had endured silently all this way, waiting for this moment. It was simply... Then Li Yunxin finally sighed on the horse and casually threw the little sword that had lost its light to the ground. The moment it landed, half of it immediately stuck into the rock. Then he jumped off the horse and only used 3 steps to reach the large rock. These 3 steps stunned the Qing soldiers, Li Jun and even Kong Tongzi. He was more than 100 steps away from the rock, but his steps were elegant and calm. But his steps were graceful and calm, and no one could see how he had crossed such a long distance. He stopped in front of Kong Tongzi. Kong Tongzi gritted his teeth and stared at him, waiting for him to lower his head and speak to him with either pride, arrogance, or pity. However, Li Yunxin took another step and swept past him. Does Brother Lu not remember that Li Yunxin in the city of Wei? Li Yunxin looked at Yi Emperor Lu Xingyang with a slight smile. We've been apart for a few months. I didn't know how you were. It wasn't until I saw you and knew that you were all right that my heart fell to the ground. Kong Tongzi froze in place. It wasn't because he had a slight impression of the name, Li Yunxin. It was because he was ignoring him. Was he treating him like he didn't exist? Li Yunxin stood with the 2 ghost emperors on the lone pine and bluestone beside the rolling cliffs. These 2 ghost emperors were both powerful demons. In particular, Emperor Li was famous for his viciousness. No one did not fear him. However, Li Yunxin's aura was not weak at all in front of them. He was tall and slender and wore white clothing. The sleeves of his robe fluttered in the autumn wind like an immortal who could fly away at any moment. In the eyes of the Qing soldiers who had been fleeing in all directions, this scene stunned them for a moment. He already knew that this Daoist priest Hunyuanzi was beautiful and elegant, but now that this beauty was paired with such a powerful aura, it was more than 1,000 times more shocking. Because of this, they all stopped in their tracks. Many of them had fled with Ding Min and Su Mao. At this point he hesitated and asked what he should do, because fleeing in all directions was the worst plan. Let's not talk about whether he could avoid the beasts and the demon soldiers in the mountains. Even if they avoided it once they left Manwan Mountain and reached the Qing army camp near Tongtian Swamp, they would lose all the red soil they were transporting. It would be difficult to report back. Ding Min leaned on her saber and stood on the hill. She stared at the white figure on the bluestone with a frown, dumbfounded. It wasn't that he hadn't thought this Daoist priest was powerful, but he hadn't thought he was this powerful. He wasn't stupid. Looking at Kong Tongzi's appearance, he already knew how terrifying those two emperors of the gods were. But now, this Daoist priest Hunyuanzi who called himself Li Yunxin was standing in front of them. Furthermore, he looked as if he had known him a long time ago. Who exactly was he? Thus he took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Let's wait and see." He thought for a bit, but his gaze never left Li Yunxin's body. "We've already scared the horses just now. We can't report back on this mission. Our general died again. If we return to the camp now, we won't have a good ending. Perhaps he can still save us." After he finished saying these words to the soldiers behind him, he heard the ghost king on the bluestone who called them Qing and I say, "Li Yunxin." There was some confusion in his voice as if he wasn't sure. After a moment his voice became certain. "Li Yunxin. I remember you." Emperor Yi Alvizhinyang was also a ghost king. But he was different from Emperor Li. He had been a ghost for a long time and had been muddle-headed for a long time. As a result, his mind was damaged. He couldn't remember many things clearly. He was like an especially forgetful old man. But now that he saw Li Yunxin again and heard his words, he finally remembered this person. It was this person who broke the seal of his ruined palace and allowed him to regain his mind. He had the fortune he had today. When he remembered this, he immediately burst into laughter, startling the huge beasts under the rock and causing them to growl in a low voice. "When I first saw you, you were still a human, and now, you have also become a demon. Haha, we can be considered to be kindred spirits." Hearing this, Ding Min and Su Mao's expressions changed. Demon. Cunning and cruel. Demon. Kong Tongzi's expression also changed. But it wasn't because of the demon. It was because he finally remembered the name, Li Yunxin. Wasn't he the demon that Dao Tong and Kenzo captured? He had been humiliated by a demon for such a long time. Now he was crawling at the demon's feet. Where was the justice of the world? He became more desperate and angry. He suddenly raised his head and shouted at Li Yunxin, "It's you." He enunciated each word clearly before he gritted his teeth. "You audacious demon, you went against sword sect's orthodoxy, and a few days ago, you were chased by my sect leader like a stray dog. You managed to escape with your life, and now you're hiding in the mountains and don't dare show your face. Hee hee. Ah. Ridiculous, pathetic and lamentable." Kong Tongzi's voice was getting more and more excited, and there was even a hint of sadness in his laughter. "You are a coward, and now you only dare to go with people with low cultivation like me. Now I feel relieved. I am only at the level of transcendent state, but I have been fighting with you, a monster of true state, for a whole day. Now I have fallen into the hands of you three demons. Even if I die, it will be a glorious death." Previously he wanted to fight with the two ghost emperors. But now that he thought of this Li Yunxin, he knew he was famous for being cruel and cunning. So he knew he couldn't live. Since he had the will to die, he could express it to his heart's content. As he shouted, he felt his blood was boiling. He was not afraid of any demons anymore. After he finished, he glared at Li Yunxin. Although he was still sitting on the ground, his back was ramrod straight like a nail stuck in a rock. When the Li Guqing kingdom soldiers heard this, they slowly understood. The so-called Daoist priest Primordial Chaos was a great demon. Furthermore, he was being captured by the sword sect orthodoxy. Hiding in the crowd. Was it to deceive people? Ding Min and Su Mao looked at each other. They didn't know what to say. So Li Yunxin sighed. "It is better to be a demon. But it is also troublesome." He shook his head at Yi Emperor Alvizhinyang. "After we parted, I heard news about you. In order to protect my people, you fought with the Taoists of Langya Cave Heaven. At that time I was worried that you would die. I felt regretful for a while. Till now." He cupped his hands at Emperor Li. "Of course I have heard of the Emperor of Li Kingdom. His cultivation is close to that of Grand Shang. Now that the two ghost emperors are here, what do you want to do?" Chapter 394. Emperor Li was watching Li Yunxin coldly. He seemed to have heard Emperor Yi mention it before. In fact, he did mention it. But Emperor Yi didn't remember it clearly and didn't say it clearly. Now that he saw Li Yunxin, he knew it was that person. He frowned slightly. You are Li Yunxin. I heard you have some tricks, but you are timid. That day my brother risked his life to protect your people in the city of Wei. I heard you hid in some inhibition. Humph. Emperor Yi was about to say something, but General Honghua was already impatient. She watched the development of the situation coldly and now understood the reason. It turned out that there was a demon mixed in with the Qing army and seemed to want to hide his tracks. As for the demon's name, she seemed to have heard of it before. But she also didn't know much about it. She only heard her king mention that there was a demon king called Li Yunxin. He was in the Guanyun crypt discussing with them and was attacked by them. After that, she didn't mention him anymore. It was probably because of the current situation. He was attacked by the crowd in the Guanyun crypt, so he escaped. So he mixed in with the army of mortals in the mountains and hid himself. Oh, this was a meritorious deed. Now she knew the whereabouts of the demon king. Her king Yujun was going to arrive soon. Didn't she avenge herself and help her king catch the fugitive? Thinking of this, she suddenly laughed. Standing on the head of the huge beast, she pointed at Emperor Li. You ungrateful thing, what are you doing here? When you became a ghost emperor, you were indeed a scary big demon. Unfortunately, you were injured by those old things in the Daotong Kenzo. Now you are only in the real state. But since you are a demon and have no grudge against my king, as long as you don't cause trouble today, we won't make things difficult for you. Then she pointed at Li Yunxin. This swordsman is useless. So, the one who injured me was you. Oh, Li Yunxin. I've heard about you from my king. Did you escape from the Guanyun crypt as a sinner? If you meet this general, you won't be able to escape. My great king will be here soon. This area is also surrounded by thousands of demon soldiers under my great king. Today you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. Hearing this, Kong Tongzi laughed again and shouted, That's right, that's right. I just want to see you demons fight amongst yourselves. It's best if all of you die. I didn't lose my life in vain. One cultivator and one monster quarreled. Emperor Yi frowned and shifted his gaze onto Kong Tongzi. He looked at him and said to Emperor Li, Brother, you have misunderstood him. We'll talk about it later. Then he looked at Li Yunxin and asked, Where did this swordsman come from? Li Yunxin turned around slightly and glanced at Kong Tongzi. Nothing special, just a small fish. Previously he had wanted to borrow him to infiltrate Kenzo. Now that I've met you, it's useless. Kong Tongzi sneered. He straightened his body and shouted, Hee. I, Kong Tongzi, started cultivating at the age of 12. I've only cultivated for 33 years. My cultivation isn't as good as you demons who have cultivated for hundreds or thousands of years. In your eyes, I'm just a small fish. But my Wujin sword sect master Jin Guangzi has a higher cultivation than you. Today you're complacent with these demons. A few days ago, you were like a stray dog being chased by my sect master. Now that the war between Xianmen and demons is about to start, if I die today, I'll just die 10 days earlier. I will wait for you in Sanluo Temple. Let's see what you look like then. Do it. After saying this, he frowned and closed his eyes. He just had to wait for the demon's ferocious nature to be provoked by him and raise his hand to kill him. But then he heard Li Yunxin exclaim, Oh, so your sect master Jin Guangzi didn't tell you what happened that day? After saying this, he laughed again. Good. That's easy. Come on, open your eyes and see what this is. The demon Li Yunxin finally stopped ignoring him and was willing to talk to him. This made Kong Tongzi feel a strange sense of relief. Then he didn't know why, but he actually opened his eyes and looked at what Li Yunxin said. When he looked, he saw that Li Yunxin was holding a ball of golden light in his hand. Kong Tongzi's eyes widened and he couldn't say a word for a long time. Although he was a low-level cultivator, as a disciple of Wujin sword sect, he knew what his sect master's natal magic weapon was. The golden thing in Li Yunxin's hand. If it wasn't the glazed sword heart, what else could it be? How did it fall into his hand? His throat gurgled and after a while he exclaimed, How could it be with you? What kind of trick is this? Li Yunxin snorted and laughed. So your sect master didn't tell you? Not only her natal magic weapon is with me, but her cultivation has also been greatly damaged? Then he stopped smiling and said, Do you think a few stinky Taoist priests like you deserve to take my life? Kong Tongzi was dumbfounded. Emperor Li didn't like Li Yunxin at first. But after hearing what Li Yunxin said, he laughed. I like this. What kind of people are those stinky Daoist priests? Li Yunxin smiled at him, but Kong Tongzi shouted again. It's fake. It must be fake. He shouted hoarsely as if what was taken away was not Kong Tongzi's treasure, but his own. You demons are cunning, you used this clumsy method. At this point, Li Yunxin flipped his hand and casually threw the glazed sword heart in front of Kong Tongzi. See for yourself. After he took out the treasure, the vast mountains nearby were illuminated by the light emitted by the golden magic weapon. Whether they knew or not, they all knew that this must be a very powerful and precious thing. When he said that this was the natal magic weapon of the head of Kenzo's Wuji sword sect, everyone knew that it was indeed a precious treasure. Then when someone sighed, how dare he show such a precious thing to others? Is he not afraid of being coveted by others? But he suddenly threw this treasure in front of Kong Tongzi as if he was throwing some peels of a peach. This dazzling golden glazed sword core landed on the boulder, emitting a crisp sound that stunned everyone. It spun in front of Kong Tongzi a few times before stopping. Then Kong Tongzi suddenly pounced on it, stretched out his hands and tightly hugged it, as if he was afraid that someone would snatch it. Then he stared at Li Yunxin with surprise and suspicion, and then dared to look down at the treasure. Perhaps the cultivators of Wuji sword sect had some unique method to identify this thing. Kong Tongzi only looked at it, touched it, and then suddenly raised his head, his lips trembling violently. Then he shouted, It's real. It's real. Then he was stunned for a moment and suddenly danced with joy. Ah, ha! The glazed sword heart is in my hands. It's in my hands. As he shouted, he hugged the thing tightly. He crawled 2 steps to Li Yunxin and grabbed his leg. He raised his head and looked at Li Yunxin with a burning gaze. This demon king. I am also willing to be a demon. Since you gave this to me, then you definitely want to use me, right? I will be loyal and devoted to you. I will go through fire and water, through mountains of blades and seas of fire. Ah, please bestow this glazed sword heart to me. I am willing to do anything. But Li Yunxin kicked him away. Emperor Li saw this and sized up Li Yunxin. He suddenly said to Emperor Yi Xingyang, This kid is an interesting person. I think I like him a little. Had to be able to casually throw away the glazed sword heart. There isn't a second person in the world, right? Li Yunxin smiled. This thing is useless to me. Since it is useless, then it is dead. As he said that, he turned his head and looked at Kong Tongzi. Since you like it, then take it. Tell your sect leader that I am giving it to her. Then ask her if you want it or not. Let's see if she is willing to give it to you. Kong Tongzi didn't know what he meant and could only stare at him. At this moment, the demons in the forest all lowered their bodies. Even the dozens of fierce beasts that were blocking the way lowered their heads to the ground. Suddenly, a chilly wind blew in the forest, sending sand and stones flying. General Hong Hu shouted, Pai King, you are finally here. Her voice was different from before. There was a hint of coquettishness hidden in it. Then the demon soldiers hiding in the forest suddenly shouted in unison. Their voices spread throughout the mountains, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Welcome Marshal Tongun, Flying Tiger King Yu Jun. Chapter 395. Hearing the good news from General Red Flame, Lin Weiwei's black wind suddenly paused. Then he laughed out loud. Is that so? I just had a drink with the demon kings and the heavens sent me such a wonderful thing. Let me have a look, where is the treasure? As soon as he finished his words, Hei Feng suddenly retracted his body and turned into a man with a stocky build. He appeared in front of the formation beside General Red Flame. Li Yunxin had seen Yu Jun before. At that time he was in Hatred's palace, and a group of demon kings made things difficult for him. And Yu Jun was one of the first few to make things difficult for him. After that, he used the aura in the palace to kill a great demon emperor at the peak of the true state. These demon kings were shocked and didn't dare to say anything more. At that time he saw Yu Jun only wearing close-fitting light armor. But now Yu Jun was wearing a full set of armor. Perhaps it was because all the demon soldiers under her had come out at the same time, which made her look extremely majestic. She was wearing a thick and heavy armor made of black iron fish scales. Her skirt covered her knees and was about 2 to 3 fingers thick. He wore a black iron crown on his head, but there were no feathers on the crown. Instead there were 2 human skulls embedded in the crown. He wore a pair of tiger head boots made of python skin, and the eyes of the tiger head were made of fiery red gems. They were still shining in the dark night. He held a large golden saber in his hand. Yujun was a demon and he was much taller than ordinary people. He was more than 10 feet tall and was as tall as 2 to 3 people. Therefore the saber's blade was also very large and it looked like a door. When people saw these fierce beasts blocking the way, they only felt that these fierce beasts were very majestic. But now Yujun landed on the fierce beast and treated it as his mount. As soon as the Tiger Demon King appeared, the demons in the forest became very imposing, and their voices rose to the sky. The Tiger Demon was also very proud of himself. Riding on the back of the fierce beast, he lifted the door-sized saber with one hand and pointed it at the big green rock. Emperor Li, today let's settle our old scores. When the Tiger Demon King appeared, Emperor Li didn't want to show weakness. Therefore he took 2 steps forward and stood at the edge of the large green rock, blocking Li Yunxin who was behind him. Hearing his challenge, Emperor Li sneered and said, "You? When I was the son of heaven you were just demons hiding in the mountains. When I became a ghost cultivator I didn't even put you in my eyes. That Lord Tongtian attacked me when I was seriously injured and delirious, but he was still defeated by me. Do you think someone like you is qualified to challenge me?" Li Yunxin frowned slightly at the curses of the 2 fiend demons. Emperor Li used to be a human, so it was understandable that he had the habit of being human. However, this Yujun was a demon. Back in the Palace of Hatred he couldn't wait to eat Wuxia. With such a violent and rash temperament, he was now acting like a general and cursing in front of the formation instead of brandishing his saber. It was really strange. While he was hesitating, Yi Emperor Lu Xingyang, who was behind Emperor Li, took a step towards him and said in a low voice, "Li Yunxin, you should leave now." Li Yunxin was slightly stunned. Lu Xingyang said, "Jilan and I have something to do here so we can't leave. But I was seriously injured in Wei-Du and haven't recovered yet. Jilan is also seriously injured. Now she is only at the level of perfected master, so she may not be a match for Yujun. But Yujun has been defeated by us before, so we are in a stalemate now. Maybe he is waiting for help. If you don't leave now, when his help comes, you won't be able to leave either." Ji was the surname of the royal family of Li Kingdom. Therefore Li Yunxin knew that this Jilan referred to Emperor Li. It seemed that the 2 ghost emperors seemed to have some plans in this mountain, so they lingered here and there. Before this he had fought with the tiger demon a few times, so they were evenly matched. Li Yunxin wasn't a warm-hearted person. He was only willing to share his feelings with people he liked. As for Yi Emperor Alvi Xingyang, he could barely be considered as someone he looked up to. Before the city of Wei was burned down by the Daoists of Langia Cave Heaven, Yi Emperor risked his life to send his subordinates out of the city because of his promise to him. He hadn't returned this favor yet. This kind of thing was just friendship for ordinary people, but for cultivators, it was friendship and karmic debt. Therefore Li Yunxin sighed slightly in his heart. Since he was involved in this, it was time to return the favor. He smiled at Lu Xingyang. "In the city of Wei we used each other and took what we needed. But when the city was destroyed you were still loyal. This is something I didn't expect. I am a person who will take revenge and repay kindness. I will return this favor to you today. Tell me, are the 2 of you planning to leave this place, or are you planning to kill this Yujun as well?" Lu Xingyang shook his head. "We can't say what we are going to do. Now, you don't have to put yourself in a difficult position. We will always have a way." Emperor Li also listened to Li Yunxin's words. At this moment when Yujun started to scold again, he turned back. "You really talk big. Although I'm only in the true state, I've already fought with this tiger demon a few times, and I haven't gained any advantage. Yet you're talking about killing it. Do you think that your means are above mine? This tiger demon is waiting for reinforcements. But I want to end it with him tonight." In another hour, when the crescent moon rises in the sky, I will be at the peak of my power. I will kill this reckless beast. Li Yunxin said softly. Oh. He knew that at this moment Emperor Li was indeed holding on. He didn't have the confidence to defeat Yujun, so he had to wait for the right time. But because of some special reason he couldn't just leave. and Yujun seemed to have fought with the two ghost emperors before and didn't gain any advantage. So he was also waiting for reinforcements. In fact, this Emperor Li was a guy worth befriending. Li Yunxin had a few thoughts in his mind. Emperor Li was the enemy of hatred, which meant he was the enemy of all the demons of the Dragon Dynasty. But naturally he was the enemy of the Xianmen, and his words also revealed that it was the Freemasonry who killed him. They were the most reliable natural allies. And look at Emperor Li. When they first met, his words were full of contempt, as if he looked down on him. But soon after he praised him for one or two trivial things. This meant that Emperor Li was actually a very rare person in this world, with a true temperament. Maybe it had something to do with his previous profession. As an emperor, especially the emperor of the Li Kingdom, he probably didn't have to care about what others thought, and he could express his emotions as much as he wanted. So Li Yunxin laughed in a low voice. In terms of cultivation, I may not be better than you, Your Majesty. But in terms of tactics. As he said so, he slowly walked out from the darkness behind Emperor Li. At this moment, Tiger Demon Yujun was cursing. Speaking proudly, he turned to look at the demon soldiers and demon generals around him. Those demons immediately laughed along with him. Yujun also laughed proudly. As soon as he turned back, he saw Li Yunxin, who appeared next to Emperor Li. As a result, his laughter was stuck in his throat. His mouth was wide open and he did not have the time to close it. He looked extremely strange. When the fiery red general saw Li Yunxin, she stretched out her hand and put her arm around Li Yunxin's waist, which was as thick as a water bucket, and said in a sweet voice, "My lord, there is also this man. Isn't he the demon that my lord mentioned a few days ago?" But he didn't hear his king say anything. When he looked up, he saw Yujun's dumbfounded look, so he was also stunned. Yujun and the Red General didn't say anything, so the demon soldiers and demon generals in the forest also stopped talking, not knowing what had happened. So for a moment, as soon as Li Yunxin appeared, the cliff immediately became silent, which was very weird. Emperor Li frowned and turned to look at Emperor Yi. But LV Xingyang was also puzzled. Li Yunxin was only in the transcendent state when she was in the city of Wei. Later she became a demon of the real state with his power, but her cultivation was not very high. Why did it become like this? They didn't know, and neither did Li Yunxin. Why did Yujun become so afraid of him? But Yujun himself knew it. He cursed in his heart. Why did he meet such a devil? He didn't take Lord of Wei River and Qi Wen seriously at first. On the contrary, when they were in the Yazi Palace, the group of demon kings, led by human sovereigns, wanted to share and eat this so-called Wei River Lord. Even if they didn't eat him, they wanted to scare him so that the dragon's son, who had a low cultivation base, would know that they, the demon kings of the mountains, were not easy to deal with. But unexpectedly he killed that human monarch on the spot. How could they not know the cultivation of human monarch? Sometimes he didn't even give face to Lord Tongtian, and he even had the intention of making himself king. Yujun had fought with human monarch before. Not to mention killing him in an instant, it was very difficult for him to not get severely injured. Hence that day in the hall, all the monster kings were trembling in fear after the death of the king. They all knew this point. This Lord of Wei River killed human monarch with one strike. How brilliant was he? 2 days ago they got to know another thing. Lord Tongtian's hatred was furious and he suddenly gave the order to hunt. It was said that Long Jiawei River killed Wanderer Bai at night, and broke into Lord Tongtian's study to spy on his secrets. Which of the usually unruly monster kings had the guts to do this? He killed Long Duchin Master's people and broke into Lord Tongtian's study. But even if Yujun was a guy with guts as thick as a water bucket, he felt a chill down his spine when he thought of this. Lord of Wei River looked like a human. He wasn't muscular and he talked like a scholar. But he did such a crazy thing. Because of these things, Yujun was afraid of him. Yesterday, Lord Tongtian ordered all the monster kings to capture Li Yunxin in his rage. Yujun got this order and immediately sent people to find trouble with Emperor Li and Emperor Yi. He wanted to make sure that he couldn't leave here so that he wouldn't meet Li Yunxin. Who would have thought that they would actually bump into each other here? Chapter 396. Yujun was stunned for a few breaths of time, until General Honghua squeezed his arm and asked in a low voice, "What happened to my lord?" The tiger demon blinked his eyes and shook off the demon general beside him. It's actually Wei River Lord. When he came he was aggressive and insufferably arrogant. When he spoke he was full of ambition and fearless. But as soon as they saw Li Yunxin, the expression on their faces instantly changed, and it was a world of difference, causing all the people on the cliff to be stunned. But it only took Li Yunxin 2 breaths of time to understand the inside story. This result was originally planned by him. He killed King Renjun in the Hall of Hatred and then did all kinds of things to establish his prestige among the demons. He had not recovered from his serious injuries. Even if he recovered, he was not the strongest among the demon kings. Only by using this kind of method to intimidate them all, no one would dare to attack him in the future. Now he saw the results. And the results were unexpectedly good. Therefore he grinned and said, King Yujun is very impressive. The 2 rows of white teeth in his mouth flickered in the eyes of those ferocious beasts. Then he took 2 steps forward and said, Back in the hall, Lord Yu was one of those who said they would share with me. Unfortunately, I only killed that King Renjun and didn't have a chance to get close to King Yujun. He stopped and stared at the tiger demon. Now King Yujun can't wait to chase after me. Is he seeking death? Hearing this, the tiger demon's heart beat wildly. King Renjun was killed by him. Wanderer Bai, who added fuel to the fire in the hall that day, was also killed by him. This guy really bore a grudge because of what happened that day. A demon of the true realm like him had long developed intelligence. Although he was usually cruel, he still cherished his life. Hearing what Li Yunxin said, he couldn't care about anything else. He just wanted to escape first and then think about it later. Thus he hurriedly waved his hands. Lord Wei River has misunderstood. That Lord Tongtian. After Lord Wei River left, he was furious. He ordered all the demon kings to capture Lord Wei River. The tiger demon rolled its eyes. When I was in the hall, I saw Lord Wei River's appearance and fell in love. Admiration. That's why I wanted to send a message to Lord Wei River. How could I have any other thoughts? All the demon generals around King Li Yunxin were stunned when they saw what he did. General Red Flame glanced at Li Yunxin, then at his own king, and didn't know what to say for a long while. But in the end he was still a coward. He knew that he had brought bad luck to his king and provoked a formidable fellow. Thus he quietly retreated to the back of the formation, not daring to make a sound. Emperor Li furrowed his brows. He stared at Li Yunxin for a while and then turned to look at Emperor Yi. Emperor Yi Xingyang was confused too. So many things had happened in the few months that they were apart. How could he know what Li Yunxin had encountered, how many hardships he had gone through, and how did he get to where he was today? As he was at a loss. Li Yunxin stood in the wind. He lowered his head and brushed his nails. Then he looked up and smiled at King Li Yunxin. I see. Then I owe you a favor. Then he stopped smiling and snorted coldly. You don't have to say such nonsense to me. Do you think I don't know what you and that hatred are thinking? Since I have fallen out with him, we are irreconcilable enemies. You saw me here today. When you go back, you will definitely inform him. I'm not afraid of that. I'm going to find someone to tell him that I don't want to be with him anymore. King Li Yunxin didn't know that Li Yunxin had discussed with Hatred and Zither Lady about the plot against Xianmen. He also didn't know what happened that night. Now that he had heard all this, he could only muddle-headedly feel that there was some discord between the Dragon Clan brothers, and they had finally turned against each other. Then he heard that Li Yunxin was going to let him go back and inform him. He felt relieved. Now that he knew that the danger was over, he thought of other things. Tonight was really embarrassing. Moreover, it was witnessed by so many demons. But he couldn't kill all of his subordinates. Humph. I can only wait until I escape and gather people to capture this Li Yunxin and skin her alive. Only then can I save some face. Once he thought of this, a ferocious glint appeared in his eyes. He even regained some of his courage. As he coughed. Of course. Wei River Lord is magnanimous and doesn't mind the past. I'm really grateful. But where is Wei River Lord going from now on? If I know, I can give an explanation to Lord Tongtian. Otherwise, if I find out that I met Wei River Lord empty-handed. Li Yunxin frowned and interrupted him. I told you to leave. You don't want to leave. Do you want to die here? I'll fulfill your wish. The tiger demon shivered. The courage he had just gained almost disappeared. He hurriedly said, Yes. I'll go back and tell Wei River Lord. Go. Then he turned around and shouted. He rode on the beast and was about to leave. His beloved General Redfire had only heard of the name Li Yunxin. The other demon soldiers and generals didn't know what had happened. Now that their king wanted to leave, they had to leave. However, he had just taken 2 steps when Li Yunxin on the cliff shouted again, "Wait!" The tiger demon was stunned and turned to look at him. But Li Yunxin frowned. There was a long, thin golden object in his hand. "Bring this dragon god token back to hatred." Most demons in the world knew about the dragon god token. It was said that it was made from the scales of Shinryu. However, there were only a few who had actually seen it. Now that they saw the one in Li Yunxin's hand, they immediately knew that it was real. The reason was none other than because the divine dragon token emitted a pressure that seemed to have come from the primordial times and when the heavens and the earth were split apart. It wasn't very strong, but it possessed a peerless dignity that caused one's scalp to go numb, one's legs to go weak, and one couldn't help but want to prostrate in worship. The tiger demon was first frightened by Li Yunxin, then released by Li Yunxin, and now it was called back. Seeing such a rare treasure, its mood fluctuated several times, and with the deterrence of the dragon god token's dragon chi, its mind gradually became muddled. Firstly, it was because of his yearning for this treasure. Secondly, it was because he had let down his guard slightly. Hence, after a slight daze, he stared at the thing in Li Yunxin's hand. "This is to be given to little Wang?" Li Yunxin frowned and shouted impatiently, "What's with all this nonsense? Come and get the dragon god token and bring it back to him." How could Yujun think about it? 4 ordinary demons like them, who didn't have the thought of taking a look and touching the divine dragon token? Thus, he hurriedly jumped off the ferocious beast he was sitting on and ran over with large strides. He jumped up the cliff and stood in front of Li Yunxin. At this moment, General Honghua felt that something was wrong. She said, "Pai King." But the tiger demon's mind was focused on the dragon god token. He couldn't hear her. He stretched out his thick arms and involuntarily knelt on one knee, waiting for Li Yunxin to hand over this supreme treasure to him. He was more than 10 feet tall. Now that he knelt on one knee, his body was the same as Li Yunxin's. But Li Yunxin didn't give him the dragon god token immediately. Instead, he threw it in his hand and held it. He waited a few more times. Seeing that the tiger demon's eyes were following the dragon god token in his hand, he suddenly laughed and said, "I can give you the token. But Yujun, you have to give me something in exchange." Because of Li Yunxin's manipulation of people's hearts, because of the flickering light of the night, because of the fear of lingering on the edge of life and death, because of the devil planted in his heart, because of the fear of the demon race's treasure. At this moment Yujun had completely lost his mind. He could only speak in a daze, as Lord Wei River commands, "Your head is so hairy and cute." Li Yunxin laughed, "Why don't you let me play with it?" After that he waved his right hand. The body of a true state demon was strong. But this dragon god token, which looked like a small sword, was given to him by Shinryu in Dongting that night. The scales of Shinryu were tough and sharp. How could a strong body be able to resist it? Puchi. The head of the true state demon Yujun flew up into the sky, and so did his blood. Li Yunxin reached out his hand and grabbed the tiger demon's head. In just a breath's time, the huge human head revealed its true form, turning into a furry tiger head. Then he uttered a spell and a ball of green light appeared in his left hand. He waved it again. The unlocked Toad Palace, a magic treasure made by the sages, spread out silently and imprisoned the tiger demon's soul as well. At this moment the huge body on the roof fell down. It stayed on the rock for a while, then fell down because of the lubrication of its own blood. A huge tiger body landed on the ground, raising a cloud of dust. This sudden turn of events caused the demons in the forest to be dumbfounded once again. After 3 breaths' time, when Li Yunxin threw Yujun's head to the ground and let it roll to the feet of General Honghua, these little demons cried out, "Our king is dead." Then they fled in all directions. The trees in the forest shook, the owls flew away, and the dust rose into the sky. It was as if a great army was defeated. Only then did Li Yunxin clap his hands and turn to look at Emperor Li. "Your Majesty, what do you think of my trick?" Emperor Li was stunned. After 3 breaths' time he frowned. Then he frowned. "You," after a moment of silence his brows relaxed and he laughed out loud, "Good. Good. Good. When I was the emperor of the human world, I had a general named Xianxia. He wore a white robe and was very brave. There was a nursery rhyme that said, "Great generals should not be imprisoned and armies avoid the white robe." And now you, Li Yunxin. You can also be called, armies avoid the white robe. Asterisk asterisk asterisk, Qin Qingji, a general of southern Liang during the northern and southern dynasties. Armies avoid the white robe, from the history of southern dynasties Qin Qingji. Chapter 397. This Emperor Li seemed to be a true person, which was rare. Although he was disdainful of Li Yunxin before, now that he had displayed such an unexpected ability, the last bit of ill feelings in his heart disappeared. Instead he started to praise Li Yunxin, not concealing his admiration at all. Li Yunxin found him even more interesting and laughed. "I just did it casually. This tiger demon has been rude to me in the past. Bumping into me tonight can be considered as his doom has arrived." As for the others, speaking till here, he turned to look at Kong Tongzi, who was staring blankly and not saying a word. "Did you see it?" When the Kenzo cultivator Kong Tongzi first met Li Yunxin, he thought he was just a painter. Later he saw him talking to the two ghost kings and knew that he was a great demon. But at that time he was determined to die and only wanted Yujun to kill this demon so that he would not die in vain. And now, this Li Yunxin actually killed Yujun. In his heart, he was already a super great demon with great cultivation, and absolutely not to be looked up to. However, the moment he saw Li Yunxin, he was terrified. In the end, he didn't even put up a fight before his head was chopped off. That was a great demon of the true state. The two ghost kings had high cultivation and could still hide the shock in their hearts and only laughed. But this Kong Tongzi, how could he hide it? Now that he heard Li Yunxin talking to him, he immediately shivered, and his whole upper body bounced up from the ground and could only say, "Ah." But he could not even say a complete sentence. Li Yunxin snorted, "It's good that you saw it. Go back and see those people from the Daotong Kenzo and tell them what happened today truthfully. If you dare to lie, I will make you die without a whole corpse." At this moment, all the pride and anger of this sword cultivator was gone. In front of such a powerful and terrifying existence, whether it was pride or anger, it was just useless and unnecessary emotions. He no longer had the thought of taking this glazed sword heart and becoming a demon. Seeing the powerful tiger monster Yujun being beheaded in front of him, no matter how high his cultivation was, what could he do? For a moment he was disheartened and all his thoughts were extinguished. After standing still for another quarter of an hour, white mist suddenly rose from the top of his head. His face also began to age. His face drooped, his body stooped, and 3 clusters of colorful flower-like clouds reappeared on top of his head before quickly disappearing. After a dozen or so breaths, Kong Tongzi had become an old man with white hair and beard. However, his hand, which was covered in blue veins, was still tightly holding onto the golden glazed sword heart. Because of everything that had happened overnight, he had entered the true void tribulation, and his cultivation had been completely crippled. Under the rock, the Qing army and Li army watched all of this happen but could do nothing. They could not escape or resist. They could only watch in the cold autumn night and wait for the heavens to decide. At this moment, although the demons had retreated in a panic, they saw the terrifying changes that had happened to the sword cultivator Kong Tongzi. They also knew that this so-called priest Hunyuanzi was actually a great demon, so they were even more terrified. Then they saw Li Yunxin turn around and say to Emperor Yi, "Brother Liu, I know you have an obsession. But now I am also cultivating. I have some demons in my heart that I need to dispel and some emotional tribulations that I need to go through. These Qing army have been with me for a day and a night, so it can be said that we are connected by fate. Brother Liu, can you do me a favor and let them live?" Liu Xingyang frowned. "When I was in the city of Wei, I knew you were a cultivator. Now that you are a demon, are you still cultivating?" Hearing this, Emperor Li also frowned. "Cultivator, humph. What's so good about learning from those stinky Daoists?" As he spoke, he looked coldly at Kong Tongzi sitting on the ground. "For example, this stupid thing. He cultivates and has many tribulations to go through. And in the end? Now that his cultivation is completely crippled, what's the use? It's better to be a demon like us and live freely. Who cares about the tribulations?" Li Yunxin smiled. I just want to experience the feeling of the Taishang realm. He said this casually as if he wasn't talking about the supreme realm of Taishang Wangqing, but about which restaurant's food was delicious. Emperor Li and Emperor Yi were both stunned by his words. Then Emperor Li said, "What did you say?" It seemed that he had heard wrongly. Taishang Wangqing. There was still a trace of a smile on Li Yunxin's lips. He said lightly, "Both of you are first-rate immortals and demons now. Aren't you curious about the experience of the highest realm of cultivation?" Emperor Li took a step back and looked at him again. This guy was really strange. When he was an emperor he had seen many people. Even though some people said he was muddle-headed, even the muddle-headed emperor of a country had the ability to recognize people. He just didn't want to use it. But now Li Yunxin had surprised him several times. It was really interesting. Emperor Li Jilon was a proud person. So she only liked LV Xingyang. They were both emperors of a country and had some common language. But now she felt that the more she looked at Li Yunxin the more she liked him. So she couldn't help but say a few more words. "There are so many interesting things in the world. Why do you only focus on cultivation? Isn't it more interesting to expand and build a new world?" Li Yunxin shook his head. "It's boring for me. In this world, perhaps the only thing that can attract me is the matter of cultivation. I have never experienced it and I can't imagine it either. Every step was novel and not dull at all. As for expanding and building a new world, it's just an extra gain on the way. It's not the goal." Then he looked at LV Xingyang. "You want to be happy but I want to see something new. If I know I can't see it, this world for me has no fun." He made the matter sound so serious that LV Xingyang sighed. "Just this once." Li Yunxin raised his hands to him and picked up Kong Tongzi on the rock. With a leap he landed in front of the Qing army. An hour ago he was in the Qing army. These soldiers still felt safe. Now when he landed again the Qing people around him all retreated. In an instant a large space was cleared for him. In the end he had beaten back the demon soldiers all over the mountain. These Qing soldiers did not run. They only stared at him in a daze. Their faces were filled with fear and hesitation. They didn't know what was waiting for them. But Ding Min didn't retreat. He was an old soldier and the leader of this small group. If he retreated like everyone else it would be a very embarrassing thing. And so he stood in front of Li Yunxin one step away. Li Yunxin casually threw the old Kong Tongzi at his feet. "Take him and go down the mountain. Then hand him over to the people of the Five Sword Sects. Your matter is over." Ding Min gritted his teeth. He looked at Kong Tongzi and then at Li Yunxin. After a moment he said, "You are a demon." Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and looked at him with a false smile. "So, how can there be a demon like you? You don't seem like a demon." Ding Min's voice was raspy and raspy. It was as if he was doing his best to control his throat so that his voice wouldn't tremble. "Why did you save us? What is your goal?" Seeing that Li Yunxin didn't speak and didn't have any intention of harming him, his voice eased slightly. He then said, "You are different from other demons. Although you saved us, if you want us to do something that goes against." Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. Turning his body he said, "What do you have on you that is worth me scheming against?" After saying this he leaped back onto the rock. After a moment these Qing soldiers looked at each other. Naturally there was nothing on them that was worth this great demon scheming against, right? But why did he save them? But they still heard Li Yunxin's order, including Li Yunxin's army. Diwu Jing, who was kneeling under the rock, turned his head to look at the Qing soldiers and then at Kong Tongzi. Only then did he stand up and saluted Emperor Li. "Your Majesty." Emperor Li turned to look at him. Diwu Jing said, "Your Majesty, I am not willing to go. I am willing to stay by your Majesty's side and kill our way into the capital to get rid of the evil and the fake emperor." Emperor Li smiled. "You are loyal. But if you stay by my side, what about these people? Are you also willing to stay by my side?" The Ghost Emperor asked. But only a few people said, "I am also willing." But more people didn't say anything. They just lowered their bodies even more. Those who left the army were just ordinary people. They had wives and daughters and they had families. Most of them risked their lives not for the Li Kingdom or the emperor, but for their wives and children, and to get promoted and get rich. This situation was already in Diwu Jing's mind. He continued, "Your Majesty, these brothers also have wives and children. They are not like this general who is all alone. At this point, Emperor Li suddenly burst into laughter. His voice was so loud that the ground trembled slightly. I am all alone. Good good good. Am I not alone now? Then he turned to Emperor Yi. Brother, your general of the Jinwu guards, Diwu Boyu, has the same surname as my loyal general Diwu Jing. It seems that we are fated. Fifth Jing was slightly stunned. After a moment he said, Fifth Earl Yu. Your Majesty, the ancestors of this general's branch were originally from the Yi country. One of our ancestors was the general of the Golden Guards of the Yi country, Fifth Earl Yu. Emperor Li laughed even more. He waved his big sleeve and suddenly a gust of black air swept through the air. It was like a shadow shrouding the heads of every soldier of the Li kingdom. Since there is such a connection, I will grant you your wish. I will make you the general of cavalry of the Ghost Kingdom of the Nether Kingdom. Since you are a general, how can you not have soldiers under your command? If you like them, they will be with you. As soon as he said this, Diwu Jing exclaimed, Your Majesty, no. But his voice stopped abruptly. After the black air swept through, nearly 100 soldiers of the Li kingdom fell to the ground. After a moment, more than 90 souls with blurred faces stood up from the corpses. Emperor Li killed all these people in one breath. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.